Buenas tardes a todos. Este primer día de Birthday Life hemos tenido una mañana excelente en donde compartimos desde Puerto Rico, Ecuador, Uruguay y además tuvimos un foro de jóvenes que nos dejó inspirado en saber que hay un futuro para las nuevas generaciones que aman a las aves y que están dispuestos a proteger los hábitats de nuestras aves compartidas. Ahora, en esta tercera sesión, queremos agradecerles principalmente a todos nuestros patrocinadores principales, al Servicio de Bosques del Servicio de Agricultura de Estados Unidos, al grupo o la organización Partners in Flight o Compañeros de Vuelos, que es un conjunto de organizaciones que trabajan en todas las Américas por la protección de nuestras aves compartidas, al Servicio de Manejo de las Tierras de Estados Unidos, al Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, al Servicio de Pesca y de Fauna de Vida Silvestre y principalmente también a Untitled for the Tropics, quien ha apoyado a muchos de nuestros coordinadores con binoculares para continuar sus programas. En la tarde del día de hoy también tenemos a todos nuestros colaboradores, amigos y organizaciones que nos acompañan, a Vortex, quien nos donan los binoculares que otorgamos a través de Untitled for the Tropics, a Icarus y otros aliados que han dado fondos para reproducir materiales educativos en distintos idiomas que son llevados a cada uno de ustedes que celebran el Día Mundial de las Aves Migratorias en inglés, en español y próximamente en francés y portugués. También a todos nuestros amigos que celebran cada año el Día Mundial de las Aves Migratorias, como el grupo de Birds Caribbean y Pavo. Bueno, muchas gracias a todos por esta nueva sesión. Vamos a introducir a una serie de actividades o presentaciones que van a darnos recomendaciones acerca del día, cómo proteger a las aves, como los cultivos de café, cómo hacer que tus ventanas sean más amigables con las aves, y también vamos a tener, iniciando esta sesión, una visita virtual a la colección ornitológica Fels, que es la colección más grande de América Latina, y tenemos aquí en este preciso momento a su curadora, Margarita Martínez. Margarita, puedes encender tu video. Puedes también compartir tu pantalla. Bienvenida. Margarita Martínez es de Venezuela, es la curadora de la colección ornitológica Fels, y ella nos va a dar una breve introducción antes de ver un video que nos va a llevar por los pasillos de este increíble lugar. Entonces, Margarita, puedes hacerlo pantalla completa y eres bienvenida en este espacio de Birthday Life, un gran aliado de la colección ornitológica Fels.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Esta charlita es introductoria a un video que elaboramos para el día de hoy. Aquí les estoy mostrando a nuestros fundadores, William H. Phelps, su hijo Billy Phelps y su nuera Kathleen de Phelps. Todo comenzó en una expedición que duró desde noviembre de 1937 hasta marzo de 1938 en el majestuoso Aullante Puy, al sur del Orinoco. También le vamos a presentar al rupícola rupícola, que es el emblema de nuestra institución, y a las joyas literarias consideradas entre los 10 mejores libros de Venezuela referentes a las aves de Venezuela, elaboradas por Meyer de Chance y Billy Phelps. Bienvenidos a nuestra institución. Es la primera colección privada en Latinoamérica y consta de una biblioteca completamente especializada en ornitología y temas relacionados, con gran cantidad de volúmenes disponibles para el uso de la investigación ornitológica venezolana por propios y extranjeros. La colección de aves está complementada con diferentes presentaciones de muchos ejemplares que tenemos depositados en nuestra sede, también disponibles para la investigación y consulta de aquellos que sean aficionados a la observación de aves. Además, contamos con el archivo de la colección ornitológica Phelps, que comprende una serie de documentaciones que están desde mapas y croquis originales de los sitios visitados hasta correspondencia de la vida y memoria de la actividad científica de nuestros fundadores. Entre los proyectos que se están llevando a cabo en estos momentos y que tienen o muy larga data o están iniciándose, tenemos 3 muy emblemáticos. El programa de monitoreo anillado en el Parque Nacional Henri Pittier en su vertiente sur, y el de aves y cacao, que comenzó en el 2018 y que se ha llevado a cabo hasta el presente en la vertiente norte del mismo parque. En ello estamos viendo por más de 30 años el paso de aves migratorias residentes en el Paso de Portachuelo, y ahora estamos enfocándonos en cómo la estructura de las comunidades cambia con la fenología del cultivo del cacao. Además, tenemos también enfocados aquellas especies venezolanas que tienen rutas migratorias locales como el Chrysolampis mosquito. Entonces, les vamos a dar la bienvenida a este video para que conozcan nuestra colección ornitológica Phelps. Que tengan todos muy buenas tardes y un feliz día y festival de aves para todos.
Muchas gracias, Margarita. Please, Marco, play the video, Margarita.
Hola, bienvenido a la Fundación William H. Phelps, la colección ornitológica más grande de América Latina. Aquí tenemos a nuestro fundador, William H. Phelps. Una vez que entres a nuestro museo, vas a ser registrado en este libro que se llama Colección Ornitológica Phelps, donde vas a poner tu firma y tus observaciones de qué te pareció esta visita que nos estás haciendo. Gracias, bienvenido. Adelante.
Hola, buenos días, bienvenidos todos, especialmente la gente de Environment for the Americas. Aquí en la colección ornitológica Phelps le damos la bienvenida para celebrar el Día de las Aves Migratorias. Esta colección existe desde 1937-38 con la primera expedición que se hizo a Ullantepuy. Estamos aquí a la orden de todos los ornitólogos que quieran venir a investigar, a registrar todo lo que nosotros tenemos, 83.000 pieles, una biblioteca de 20.000 volúmenes, y como les dije antes, encantado de participar en este Día de la Mundial de las Aves Migratorias y a la orden siempre. Yo soy el presidente de la Fundación Phelps, que es la fundación que protege, ampara y financia a la colección ornitológica Phelps. A la orden aquí en Caracas, Venezuela. Gracias.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Miguel Lentino, soy el director científico de la colección Phelps. Nuestro trabajo consiste en coordinar y dirigir parte de los proyectos de investigación que se desarrollan aquí en la colección. Esta colección ha sido uno de los pilares fundamentales dentro de la ornitología venezolana, dado que generó toda la información básica para la distribución de las especies de aves en Venezuela. Bueno, para desarrollar el trabajo de la colección, que ha sido efectuado desde hace 70 años, se desarrollaron 2 aspectos fundamentales. Uno es la biblioteca, la cual es una de las colecciones bibliográficas más importantes de Latinoamérica, en que tenemos más de 20.000 tomos y 200 y cerca de 300 títulos de revistas, en los cuales se basó la información para poder desarrollar todo el trabajo ornitológico que se efectuó. El otro aspecto importantísimo que se desarrolló a la par fue el trabajo de la colección en sí, que es lo que vamos a ver a continuación.
Buenos días, encantada de recibirlos en la colección ornitológica Phelps, la primera del país, la primera colección de aves que se organizó sistemáticamente y que representa todas las aves de Venezuela, creada por los fundadores William Phelps, padre e hijo. Soy Margarita Martínez, actualmente la curadora de la colección de aves, y tengo por funciones el hecho de conservar y mantener organizada dicha colección. Entre otras de mis funciones está llevar algunos proyectos bibliográficos, de bases de datos y de prácticas de laboratorio como la preparación de pieles de estudio. En nuestro caso, muchas de estas prácticas han servido no solo para los pasantes internos, sino también para estudiantes de biología universitarios. Entre los proyectos que lleva la colección ornitológica Phelps, aparte de lo que es el estudio propiamente dicho de la distribución de aves de Venezuela, también contemplamos las opciones que nos permitan llevar nuestro conocimiento en áreas educativas, tanto para el público general como para los niños en educación básica primaria.
Vimos las aves, cuidamos, limpiamos toda la playa para que las aves y los peces estuvieran bien.
Una de las cosas que nos ha motivado mucho es el hecho de que en las escuelas haya proyectos de aula que contemplen la conservación de las aves y sus espacios que ocupan. Otra cosa también importante es reconocer en diferentes ecosistemas la presencia de aves que estén asociadas a cultivos. Por eso llevamos no solo los festivales de aves infantiles, sino también aquellos que estén relacionados a la biodiversidad que está presente en los cultivos propios de Venezuela, como el cacao, un ejemplo de ello, o en el café.
Hola, buenos días. Mi nombre es Marilena Vivas, soy la gerente de administración. Entre mis labores está administrar todos los recursos financieros para llevar a cabo los programas y apoyar también los proyectos que llevamos a cabo cada año. Como verás, también tengo la administración de los recursos humanos.
Hola, mi nombre es Andreina López Marcos, soy asistente de proyectos en la colección Phelps y ahorita estamos trabajando en el proyecto de los tipos y paratipos de la colección. Estamos hoy revisando unas tangaras. Lo que hacemos es actualizar la información que está aquí contenida en la colección con lo que ya está digitalizado en la base de datos.
Hola, soy Germán Piñero, tesista y técnico de investigación de la colección ornitológica Phelps. Acá estamos estudiando las pieles del tucucito rubí, Crisolampis mosquitus, para el programa del Festival de Aves Migratorias Buscando el Tucucito Rubí, que busca estudiar los desplazamientos locales y el ciclo anual de la especie. En nuestra revisión hemos podido contar cerca de 160 ejemplares colectados en una amplia distribución en toda Venezuela, desde las islas hasta el sur de Venezuela, de este a oeste, y dentro de los ejemplares podemos contabilizar cerca de un 70% machos y 30% de hembras dentro de la serie.
Muchas gracias por esa increíble visita a la colección más grande de América Latina de aves. Margarita, muchas gracias por contribuir con este video para que todas las personas que están en sus casas, en sus hogares, tengan la oportunidad de visitar este espacio que está escondido en nuestro país, en Venezuela. Margarita, ¿quisieras agregar algo más antes de irte? ¿Puedo facilitar un comentario final para tu presentación?
Gracias por invitarme. Espero que sigan los éxitos en los festivales de aves por todo el territorio de este gran continente y darle más bienvenidas a muchos más niños para que aprendan a conocer a sus aves. Que estén todos muy bien. Chao.
Gracias, Margarita. Excelente. Ahora, para continuar con nuestra sesión de acciones por la conservación de las aves, ¿cuáles son esas estrategias que podemos realizar desde casa para conservar nuestros espacios naturales? Nos desplazamos a un país vecino para nosotros, es un país hermano, es Colombia, y le damos la bienvenida a Juan Felipe Restrepo es uno de los coordinadores del Festival de Aves Migratorias del Caribe colombiano. En conjunto con la organización Calidris y nuestra compañera Yanira, han llevado a cabo este programa exitoso en las costas del Caribe de Colombia. Sin más nada que agregar, bienvenido Felipe, estamos muy emocionados de ver tus resultados y acá te vamos a ayudar a compartir la presentación. Así que, bueno, bienvenidos, una breve introducción. Puedes hacer una breve introducción de ti y un saludo mientras compartimos las pantallas.
Bueno, un saludo para todos los hermanos en las aves. Las aves nos conectan, es el lema este año del festival, y nada más hermoso pues que conectarnos a través de esta actividad, de compartir nuestras experiencias a través de estos años. Mi nombre es Juan Felipe Restrepo Mesa, soy biólogo marino, trabajo en el Colegio Montessori de Cartagena como jefe de gestión del conocimiento y coordinador ambiental, y desde hace 7 años vengo de la mano de Calidris, que han sido nuestros mentores, y de otra serie de emprendedores de la ecología cívica aquí en la ciudad de Cartagena, coordinando esta hermosísima actividad que es el Festival de las Aves Migratorias del Caribe colombiano, y que hoy le dedico a todos mis compañeros coordinadores del festival pues esta presentación.
Sí.
Miguel.
Susan, ¿puedes compartir la pantalla, la presentación de Felipe, por favor? Un momento, a lo mejor tenemos un problema. Aquí viene.
Ya. Bueno, si quieren pasemos a la próxima. Muchas gracias. El festival, que este año llega a su 7ª versión, entonces tiene lugar en la ciudad de Cartagena, al norte de Colombia, y nació con las comunidades localizadas en las inmediaciones de la Ciénaga de la Virgen y Juan Polo, indicadas con la flecha roja. Una laguna costera considerada el segundo humedal en importancia en el litoral caribe colombiano, que alberga alrededor de unas 80 especies acuáticas, siendo el sitio de arribo de unas 35 especies de aves migratorias, entre las que se cuenta, por ejemplo, la garza Egreta rufescens, o garza borracha, invernante con poblaciones reproductivas permanentes y considerada vulnerable por la IUCN. La siguiente, por favor. Del millón de habitantes del distrito de Cartagena, 10% viven en el sector rural. Para ese otro 90%, la ciénaga ha sido casi invisible. En clave de ecología cívica se puede decir que este es un ecosistema que está roto, que está descompuesto. En primer lugar, con la construcción de la carretera que conectó las ciudades de Cartagena y Barranquilla, hace 30 años se cerraron todas las bocas que conectaban, o todas las bocas naturales que conectaban la ciénaga con el mar. menos una, lo cual redujo el intercambio de agua, colocando este humedal a puertas de un grave proceso de eutrofización. Igualmente, los bosques de manglar que les circundan están sometidos a tala indiscriminada y a la ocupación ilegal. El urbanismo y las nuevas obras civiles también se suman a las tensiones que lo afectan. Lo anterior ha hecho que la pesca como actividad principal de subsistencia prácticamente desapareciese, encontrando sus comunidades una alternativa en el ecoturismo, particularmente en el avistamiento de las aves. Sin embargo, pues aún prevalecen en algunos sectores prácticas como la cacería con ondas, el cautiverio de especies silvestres en jaulas, la cacería de iguanas, el incorrecto depósito de residuos y el relleno con escombros, entre otros. La próxima, por favor. Bien. Durante estos últimos 7 años, emprendedores de ciencia ciudadana y ecología cívica, junto con la comunidad, hemos venido desarrollando el Festival de las Aves Migratorias como un cierre al calendario de las aves, posicionando valores culturales y ambientales. Con el tiempo se fue transformando en una apuesta por desarrollar actividades de carácter participativo orientadas a la conservación de las especies migratorias. ¿Cuánto no ha sucedido desde ese primer festival llevado a cabo en Córdoba, Alaska, denominado Festival de las Aves Playeras del Delta del río Copper? A Colombia nos llega por el Pacífico, con el emprendimiento de la Asociación Calidri, la Fundación Yubarte y la Fundación Natura. Luego, en el Caribe, en el 2013 nos llega gracias a una gran emprendedora de la ecología cívica, a quien le quiero rendir un homenaje, que es Viviana Murra Díaz Granados y la Fundación Ecoprogreso, que de manera visionaria hicieron el primer festival en diciembre de ese año, al que denominaron Celebración de la Temporada de las Aves Migratorias. A partir del 2014 nos comenzamos entonces a juntar organizaciones no gubernamentales, instituciones educativas y por supuesto la comunidad para llevar a cabo el festival. Durante los últimos 4 años el festival ha venido siendo coordinado por la Asociación Calidris, la Fundación Serena del Mar y el Colegio Montessori de Cartagena, con el apoyo de organizaciones del ámbito local, nacional e internacional y la participación siempre activa y diligente de la comunidad y colectivos de jóvenes estudiantes de secundaria y de universidad, a quienes les quiero mandar un saludo muy especial, particularmente a Biontessori, al equipo de Equipológico, de la Fundación Mapache, que de manera voluntaria entregan y han entregado su tiempo al festival. La siguiente, la próxima, por favor. Ahí. El festival prácticamente cierra el calendario de las aves. Nuestro calendario de las aves incorpora actividades de ciencia ciudadana y de ecología cívica. El censo neotropical de aves acuáticas, el Global Big Day y los conteos de Navidad, por ejemplo, son actividades de ciencia ciudadana. En estas, el ciudadano aprende con los científicos a partir de las observaciones y los datos que arrojan los muestreos de las aves, de los protocolos y del contacto directo con el ecosistema, enriqueciendo de esta manera su cultura científica, tal como nos invita a hacerlo la UNESCO desde el año 2000. El Festival de las Aves Migratorias, como actividad de ecología cívica, promueve un aprendizaje a partir de la memoria colectiva, del amor por el lugar, de los valores, de los juegos, del arte y de la construcción de una visión compartida. La siguiente, por favor. De acuerdo con investigadores del Laboratorio de Ecología Cívica de la Universidad de Cornell, que lidera la doctora Marianne Krasny, la ecología cívica se define como el estudio de las prácticas de stewardship y sus vínculos con la comunidad, el medio ambiente y otros componentes como son los sistemas socioecológicos. Pero si bien el término stewardship se traduce literalmente como mayorazgo, el término hace más referencia a emprendimientos socioecológicos, tales como restauración de un bosque o un sendero, el cuidado de huertas comunitarias, entre muchos otros. En la imagen, por ejemplo, estudiantes del colegio INETEP de La Boquilla, una comunidad, En el 5º Festival de las Aves Migratorias, con su profesora Isabel Meléndez, aparece también una funcionaria de la Fundación Serena del Mar, Juli Payares, y niños de Villa Gloria, al cierre de una gincana en el Ecoparque Luna Forest, la próxima. En la imagen, estudiantes de los colegios Montessori de Cartagena, de La Boquilla y del proyecto de Villa Gloria, desarrollando un conversatorio al que llamamos Los niños y jóvenes le hablan a los niños y los jóvenes acerca de la Ciénaga de la Virgen y de Juan Polo. Este se llevó a cabo en las instalaciones de la Fundación Serena del Mar en Manzanillo del Mar, en el marco del Festival de las Aves Migratorias en noviembre de 2019, la próxima. Lo que subyace entonces detrás de esa definición que involucra los términos ecología y cívica son unas fuertes raíces que se han ido forjando a través de una larga tradición de participación de la sociedad civil y de una ética medioambiental basada en la profunda conexión del ser humano con su territorio. En la imagen se aprecian miembros de las comunidades de La Boquilla, Manzanillo del Mar, Punta Arena y Tierra Bomba, así como maestros, estudiantes y padres de familia y funcionarios del Colegio Montessori, la Fundación Serena del Mar, la Fundación Bahía y la Asociación Calibris en el día del cierre del 5º Festival de las Aves Migratorias del Caribe en 2018, la próxima. El festival es un muy buen ejemplo de una actividad de ecología cívica porque se desarrolla generalmente, generalmente en el término de una semana. Este año, por causa del aislamiento, lo pensamos alargar, comenzando justo en el mes de octubre, con la llegada de nuestros ilustres visitantes, hasta su partida en el mes de marzo del 2021. En el marco del festival se llevan a cabo foros, cineforos, actividades lúdicas y artísticas, avistamientos de aves, y cerramos generalmente con una gincana, que es un juego por bases, por equipos, y en cada base se busca resolver un reto que tiene un mensaje de fondo relacionado con las aves y con el humedal. Al final de cada ejercicio, el líder de la base hace con cada equipo una reflexión de lo aprendido en esa base. La siguiente, por favor, la próxima. Como una actividad de aprendizaje formal, se hace educación en la naturaleza, para la naturaleza y acerca de la naturaleza. En estas actividades se busca que el aprendizaje sea democrático, que los grupos se conformen sean diversos, que se construya confianza, que se configuren comunidades de práctica que permiten acceder a aprendizajes más complejos y que se logre alcanzar una visión compartida acerca de la importancia de las aves migratorias, de la ciénaga de la Virgen en su conjunto y la conservación y uso racional de los recursos naturales asociados al bosque de manglar y al humedal. Todas estas características de las actividades de ecología cívica. La próxima. Entonces, para ir concluyendo, son 10 las hipótesis que han permitido definir a la ecología cívica y que se cumplen en esta actividad como es el prácticas de ecología cívica emergen en lugares descompuestos, ya lo vimos. 2, debido al amor a la vida y al amor al territorio que se ha perdido, los practicantes de la ecología cívica reclaman y reconstruyen estos lugares rotos. En la imagen, uno de los equipos conformados por adultos, estudiantes y funcionarios de la Fundación Serena del Mar resuelven el reto impuesto en esa base de la gincana, que consistía en jugar un Jumanji ambientado en la temática del festival. El tema del festival del año 2018 fue las aves migratorias y la contaminación ambiental. La próxima. Al reconstruir estos lugares rotos de las actividades de ecología cívica, reconstruyen la comunidad. Los practicantes de la ecología cívica se basan en memorias socioecológicas para recrear lugares y comunidades. Y las prácticas de ecología cívica producen servicios ecosistémicos. En las imágenes vemos a un grupo conformado por adultos y niños observando las aves en un recorrido por el barrio de Manga en la ciudad de Cartagena. Vemos igualmente niños resolviendo un rompecabezas, siempre con temas alusivos a las aves, al humedal. Y vemos también a una niña luciendo las máscaras de las aves. La siguiente, por favor. Otra de las hipótesis, las prácticas de ecología cívica promueven calidad de vida las prácticas de ecología cívica promueven oportunidades para aprender y las prácticas de ecología cívica empiezan desde lo local como innovaciones a pequeña escala, teniendo el potencial de expandirse en múltiples alianzas. Y nada mejor ejemplo que este, que arranca en Córdoba, Alaska, y mira por dónde va unos años después. Aquí vemos a la comunidad participando en foros, en actividades de educación ambiental, en ambientes naturales o en un salón, y en grupos reflexionando sobre aspectos relacionados con el impacto del ser humano sobre el humedal y el ecosistema de manglar, y estos en la comunidad de aves. La siguiente. Gracias. Por último, las prácticas de ecología cívica están arraigadas en ciclos de caos y de renovación, que a su vez están arraigadas en los sistemas socioecológicos. Las personas que hacen las políticas, los tomadores de decisiones, juegan un papel fundamental en el crecimiento de las prácticas de ecología cívica. En cada una de las versiones del festival se ha hecho un gran esfuerzo de divulgación buscando ser una voz de la comunidad que clama por una mayor atención por parte de toda la ciudadanía y de la autoridad ambiental, así como de los organismos del Estado a nivel local, regional y nacional. En conclusión, el Festival de las Aves Migratorias del Caribe colombiano durante estos 7 años ha logrado despertar valores de biofilia y sentido de pertenencia del lugar entre muchos cartageneros. Cada año son mucho más las organizaciones que se nos unen para divulgar este mensaje. Ha fortalecido la eficacia política de las personas que nos organizamos para realizarlo, permitiendo ponernos metas cada año un poquito más ambiciosas, y ha fortalecido los lazos de confianza entre las instituciones que lo coordinamos y entre nosotros y las comunidades donde lo desarrollamos, permitiendo ser entonces un factor de cambio. Si bien el humedal no ha regresado a su estado original y quizás no lo llegue a estar, hemos podido entre todos estos emprendedores recuperarlo hasta un punto, sostenerlo y sostener las especies que en él habitan. El festival es una actividad de ecología cívica importantísima y permite contribuir al alcance de manera indirecta de los 17 Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible de las Naciones Unidas. Las próximas, simplemente para que vean una galería de imágenes, la próxima, y ya con eso terminé. Muchísimas gracias. De nuevo agradecerles el espacio de participación en este encuentro, en este gran foro de América, y de nuevo pues feliz de estar acá y agradecidísimo. Por último, mis coordenadas, la próxima, para quienes tengan alguna inquietud o quieran escribirnos, en fin. Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Miguel.
Muchas gracias, Juan Felipe. Interesante todo el trabajo social que están realizando en esas comunidades que yo estoy muy seguro y sé que es así, en una realidad para muchos de nuestra región. Son comunidades pobres y que estas actividades realmente les dan una vida completamente distinta, aprovechar esa naturaleza que los rodea y todo el trabajo que ustedes realizan. Buenísimo. Muchas gracias, Juan Felipe. También tenemos algunas preguntas para ti. Claro. Y que puedes compartir, que puedes contestar directamente en la transmisión en YouTube que estamos haciendo, o en la transmisión a través de nuestro Facebook Live de Environment for America. Puedes comentar directamente las preguntas que te están haciendo, así las personas también te pueden contactar, ya tienen tu contacto allá.
Ok.
Y perfecto. Déjame ver si puedo leerte alguna en este último minuto que queda.
Ok.
Mientras tanto, ¿podrías comentarnos cuándo es el próximo Festival de Aves Migratorias del Caribe colombiano?
Bueno, mira, estamos precisamente arrancándolo, y como comentaba anteriormente, por el tema de la pandemia, en lugar de ser una semana, lo vamos a hacer extendido hasta marzo del 2021, esparciendo las actividades de manera regular en estos casi 5 meses, para lograr al menos contrarrestar el efecto de no poder estar en campo, pues que es lo que más añoramos y que nos gusta tanto, sobre todo esas actividades de cierre que son siempre tan agradables y tan interesantes.
Chévere, te mandan saludos desde Cartagena y también te felicitan por un gran trabajo de inclusión y participación en la educación en Colombia. Muchas gracias, Juan Felipe. Toda la grabación va a estar en YouTube para que aquellos que no lo ven en vivo puedan luego revisar. Ahora vamos a pasar al próximo presentador. Gracias, Juan Felipe. Puedes apagar tu video. El siguiente es Luis Ricardo Arrieta, de la organización Provita. Ricardo, ¿estás por aquí? Sí. Puedes aprender tu micrófono, está todavía apagado.
Ok. Hola Miguel, ¿cómo estás?
Chévere. Luis Ricardo es venezolano también, trabaja en la organización Provita, es una organización que tiene una gran trayectoria aquí en nuestro país, realizando programas de conservación, tanto en áreas de cafetales, y también tienen un gran proyecto de conservación de un loro en una de nuestras islas, y que ha tenido un gran éxito porque han llevado la población al borde de la extinción, ahora está a salvo gracias a los programas de esta organización. Entonces, Luis nos va a hablar sobre los beneficios que se obtienen de conservar el bosque y de conservar a las aves a través de los cultivos de café. Luis, puedes compartir tu pantalla, puedes compartir tu presentación.
Dame un segundito. A ver. Okay. ¿Pueden ver?
Un momentito. Todavía no sale. ¿Dice que está compartiendo la pantalla o no todavía?
Okay,
Abajo
sí.
tiene share screen, no compartir pantalla.
Sí.
Listo, ahí va.
Okay.
Bienvenido,
Perfecto.
Luis, adelante.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias por la oportunidad, Miguel. Efectivamente, como mencionabas, esto es un proyecto para nosotros muy bonito. Déjame llevar acá un poquito el tiempo. Es un proyecto muy bonito. Desde 2016 empezamos a buscar alternativas para desarrollar un programa o un proyecto que se convirtió en una iniciativa de conservación para proteger al cardenalito, que es una especie venezolana que está en peligro de extinción. Y desde Provita, junto a otras organizaciones, como lo es el Smithsonian, como lo es el Servicio de Pesca y Fauna Silvestre de los Estados Unidos, American Bird Conservancy y otras organizaciones locales, decidimos llevar adelante un proyecto denominado Aves y Café. Este proyecto es el esfuerzo principalmente de agricultores y tiene como fundamento el llevar adelante una iniciativa que promueve digamos, cuidar el ambiente de nuestras aves migratorias y residentes. Por eso creo que la presentación quedó en buen punto con este evento que ustedes están organizando en esta semana, digamos, de las aves migratorias. ¿Me están escuchando? Tuve un problemita aquí.
Se escucha bien, Luis.
Ok, ¿me escuchas?
Sí, te escuchamos bien. ¿Y tú?
Ya va, no te escucho. Déjame buscar. Intentar.
Te escuchamos bien, Luis.
¿Aló?
Sí, te escuchamos bien, Luis. ¿Nos escuchas?
Okay. Sí, ahora sí te escucho. Perfecto. Sí. Entonces, seleccionamos un área de estudio para que evidentemente podía ser hábitat para cardenalito en una zona de alrededor de 20.000 hectáreas. Priorizamos 2.000 hectáreas, una región megadiversa de la Cordillera de la Costa, entre el Parque Nacional Henri Pittier y el Parque Nacional Macarao. Acá conseguimos dos pequeñas localidades y denominadas Piedra Cachimbo y La Florida, en este importante corredor biológico y una zona importantísima donde hay mucho endemismo también. Bueno, identificamos 200 hectáreas en las que se priorizaron los esfuerzos. Los criterios fueron que estuviese cerca del bosque prístino, que existiese agricultura y una tendencia a la deforestación. Y básicamente lo que queríamos acá era reducir la deforestación, promoviendo una agricultura, digamos, amigable con el ambiente. ¿Cómo se dice? Brindando asesoramiento técnico a los agricultores y permitiendo que a su vez estos pudieran obtener un producto diferenciado, como lo es el café de especialidad, y estos se convirtiese en un incentivo para reducir la deforestación. El programa, hicimos el primer contacto con la comunidad, contactamos muchísimas personas, se diseñaron 14 talleres orientados a manejo orgánico y producción agrícola como tal. Estos productores, algunos decidieron seguir adelante con el plan de asistencia técnica, nos recibieron en sus unidades de producción y se apropiaron de las tecnologías o de las prácticas amigables con el ambiente que se les fueron enseñando. En 2017 tenían rendimientos de 2 quintales por hectárea y actualmente se encuentran entre 5 y 7 quintales por hectárea. Un poco la meta es llevar esa producción a 15 o 20 quintales por hectárea, lo cual es un rendimiento óptimo en producción orgánica. Otra de las cosas que conseguimos acá en estas comunidades es que tenían cafetales de más de 100 años que estaban siendo deforestados. Deforestados básicamente porque la caficultura en Venezuela no es rentable desde hace algunos años por un tema de precios, de competencia con respecto a los precios del mercado internacional, y dijimos, ¿cómo se le puede dar vuelta a esto? Smithsonian tiene, el Centro de Aves Migratorias tiene una certificación que se llama Café Amigable de las Aves, o Bird Friendly Coffee, que promueve o estimula la producción de café bajo sombra con ciertos criterios que ya están estandarizados. Estos cafetales, muchos de ellos abandonados, cumplían con estos criterios de esta certificación, pero previamente debían ser certificados. Estos certificados en el mercado internacional brindan o dan un valor agregado al producto y eso se convierte en un estímulo para dejar de deforestar o para migrar nuevamente a la caficultura bajo sombra. Eso es un poco nuestra estrategia de conservación, convencer a los productores de que la caficultura es un buen cultivo. Eso lo hacemos logrando acuerdos entre tostadores interesados en el café de especialidad y de sombra, y esto genera un beneficio no solo para la comunidad, sino también para el ambiente y por ende para nuestras aves. Se creó una organización, una asociación agroforestal. En ellas los productores pudieron certificarse. Se hizo una evaluación socioambiental. Para nosotros en este proyecto el componente social ha sido fundamental porque sabemos que es determinante, digamos, para que el medio ambiente pueda, digamos, tener valor para la gente. Hay que entender cómo lo percibe la gente, cuáles son los usos que se les están dando, por qué hacen ese tipo de uso, y se hizo un excelentísimo trabajo de levantamiento de información con 70 familias. Se hizo en estas dos comunidades y el resultado fue bastante interesante. Al principio, como les digo, los cafetales eran abandonados, habían algunos productores con nuevos cafetales, pero en general la caficultura no era una actividad primaria dentro de la agricultura en esta zona, más eran los cultivos de plena exposición solar. Sin embargo, lo que ven ahí en la foto es un vivero de café de alrededor de 12.000 plantas. Esto porque con el proyecto se logró estimular la caficultura nuevamente. O sea, se despertó el interés de los agricultores por la caficultura gracias a que conectamos caficultores con tostadores interesados en estos cafés. Esta es la zona de estudio. Una cosa importante y que estoy seguro que a muchos les interesará es, bueno, qué tienen que ver las aves en todo esto, cómo saben qué aves había y qué aves no. Realizamos una línea base, digamos, un monitoreo de aves y de vegetación, y el resultado de esto es súper interesante porque encontramos en el censo se identificaron alrededor de 240 especies, pero un dato valiosísimo es que la mayor cantidad de aves migratorias estuvo asociada a los bosques con café. Esto, por supuesto, es una línea base, lo vamos a seguir realizando, pero es interesantísimo cómo el bosque de uso antrópico, o sea, los bosques de café, funcionan como refugio para las aves migratorias. Entonces, incorporamos allí el tema de sensibilizar a la gente con la importancia de las aves, cómo las aves ayudan a controlar ciertas plagas, y bueno, esto ha ido generando resultados positivos. Estas fueron las especies encontradas de aves migratorias. Sin embargo, hay potencial para que se pudiesen encontrar en esta zona muchas más aves migratorias, alrededor de 35 aves migratorias. En el censo inicial, Cetófaga cerulea fue una de las especies, digamos, mucho más comunes, y también Cetófaga fusca. Bueno, como resultado de todo esto, el trabajo de 3 años con los agricultores, muchísimo dedicación del equipo de Provito, un equipo interdisciplinario, la colaboración de actores locales, consejos comunales, líderes de las comunidades, logramos esto que hoy en día suena muy sencillo decirlo, logramos certificación orgánica según la normativa americana, y la certificación orgánica para la Comunidad Económica Europea. Es decir, estos productores podrían exportar sus cafés orgánicos a Europa y a Estados Unidos, pero también un grupo de productores puede exportar su café como café amigable de aves, específicamente 13 unidades de producción de las 35 que fueron certificadas, porque contaban con un bosque con los criterios de café amigable para las aves. Hicimos una ampliación del proyecto con la embajada británica, en un proyecto que denominamos Cultiva Sombra Cosecha Agua. Este proyecto pudo hacer un análisis de los cuerpos de agua, pudimos incrementar la superficie que estábamos abordando con asistencia técnica, y surgió un foro de agroforestería con unas experiencias maravillosas en Venezuela y América Latina sobre agroforestería. Digamos, de este proyecto también nos enorgullece muchísimo en mencionar que generamos un manual de buenas prácticas agrícolas referenciado en las prácticas de café amigable con las aves. Un manual que está disponible en la página web de Provita, en la que se explica cómo debe ser el manejo agroforestal enfocado un poco en que sea amigable con la fauna local y en especial con las aves migratorias. Desde la iniciativa Cardenalito, la conservación del hábitat es una cosa importante para nosotros, como una estrategia para luego reintroducir aves que pueden estar siendo criadas en cautiverio, y para proteger aves que hacen de estos bosques su refugio durante la época invernal. Con ABC, que es uno de los financistas de este proyecto desde el inicio, también se hizo un estudio de mercado para evaluar el potencial del mercado venezolano, tanto en el mercado nacional como en el mercado internacional. Hubo vínculos interesantísimos con organizaciones nacionales y el interés de tostadores en Estados Unidos en estos cafés. Venezuela en los años 80 fue el principal exportador de café suave en el mundo, una cosa que muy pocos conocemos, pero eso sucedió. ¿Qué estamos haciendo actualmente? Bueno, expandimos el área focal de estudio, 200 hectáreas más, renovaremos las zonas de café amigable con las aves orgánicas, queremos incrementar, estamos trabajando para incrementar el número de productores vinculados, continuamos con el entrenamiento y la capacitación de los productores. También estamos brindando asistencia técnica al principio de distancia por la situación de la pandemia. Este año estaremos implementando, ya tenemos todo el programa ajustado a Venezuela, Uniendo las Américas, que es un programa del Centro de Aves Migratorias, y con esto pretendemos vincular niños de escuelas en Venezuela con niños de escuelas en Estados Unidos y hablar sobre las aves migratorias. Un programa súper bonito. Para ello tenemos una especialista venezolana en interpretación ambiental que nos está ayudando con el ajuste de este manual. Bueno, monitorear la deforestación, reducir la deforestación y reforestar son metas para este año o este periodo del proyecto. Nuestros aliados, la iniciativa Cardenalito, Provita, por supuesto, como ejecutor de este proyecto, ABC, el Instituto de Smithsonian, como les mencionaba, y American Bear Conservancy, el IBIC, el Servicio de Pesca y Fauna Silvestre de los Estados Unidos y la Embajada Británica en Venezuela. Los actores principales de nuestro proyecto, la gente de nuestras comunidades, que ahora sienten en la caficultura una esperanza para el desarrollo sostenible y generar medios de vida sustentables. Los niños de la comunidad hemos aprovechado el Día del Caficultor en Venezuela es el 24 de abril y la segunda semana de mayo, por supuesto, celebramos el Global Big Day. Hemos unido estas actividades y hemos hecho eventos hermosísimos con las comunidades. El año pasado tuvimos el apoyo de Miguel y de Environment en un evento en el que hubo muchísimas actividades educativas relacionadas con las aves y con la caficultura. Los trabajos que hacemos. Y bueno, muchísimas gracias por su atención. Si tienen alguna pregunta, con gusto les respondo.
Muchas gracias, Luis, por todo ese trabajo increíble que están realizando en Provita y con la iniciativa del Cardenalito. Buenísimo ver todos los contactos para que las personas puedan conocer un poco más acerca del trabajo que ustedes están llevando y tienes algunos comentarios en el Facebook. Te saluda Andrés Anchondo, excelente proyecto Luis de Venezuela, saludos de Washington. También te dicen felicitaciones, qué hermoso es el lugar, dónde podemos conseguir el café. Todo esto lo puedes comentar directamente a la transmisión que estamos realizando en vivo ahora a la página de Facebook de Environment for the Americas y puedes contactar tú directamente para que ellos tengan tu contacto y puedan contactarte más rápido. También, si es posible conseguir el manual, quizás puedas colocar el link en esta transmisión de Facebook y ellos pueden descargar o acceder más rápido al manual. Algo para concluir, Luis, un mensaje acerca de las aves y el café que quieras compartir.
Responder una pregunta que nos hicieron. El café, bueno, justo ahorita estamos trabajando en un acuerdo con un tostador, la Asociación de Productores y este tostador, para hacer una edición especial de los cafés que son amigables con las aves y los cafés orgánicos. Sería la primera vez en Venezuela en muchos años que esto sucede. El link, bueno, está en la página web de Provita, pero lo voy a colocar en el chat como tal. Y pues creo que este tipo de actividades de conservación que conectan la gente con las aves deben seguir siendo promovidas. Aplaudo la iniciativa, o aplaudimos desde Provita la iniciativa de Environment, porque creemos que es necesario, sobre todo que ahorita con estas plataformas podemos compartir todas estas experiencias. Muchísimas gracias, Miguel, a ti, a todos por la atención.
Gracias, Luis. Ahora puedes permitirme dejar de compartir la pantalla para darle la bienvenida a nuestro próximo orador.
Okay, vamos a ver cómo hago esto. Okay.
Perfecto, listo. Ok, muchas gracias, Luis Ricardo. Ahora nuestro próximo orador se llama Ignacio Gutiérrez Vargas. Él viene directamente desde Centroamérica, otra vez en Costa Rica. Ignacio nos va a hablar sobre qué podemos hacer nosotros desde nuestros hogares, en nuestras ciudades o nuestras comunidades rurales para hacer también amigables nuestras ventanas con las aves. Entonces, Ignacio, estamos por acá, ya puedes prender tu micrófono y tu cámara y compartir tu pantalla.
Buenas, un saludo cordial a todos. ¿Me oigo bien? Sí.
Sí, todo excelente, pura vida.
Okay.
Adelante.
Este proyecto de abundancia e impacto de aves con ventanas en una zona urbana de Costa Rica durante 2 años comenzó debido a comentarios de la comunidad, de la universidad y de vecinos de esta por una gran cantidad de aves que encontraron muertas alrededor de los edificios. Esto después de la construcción de la expansión de la universidad a nuevos recintos. Y nosotros, al escuchar esto en la Escuela de Biología, decidimos crear este proyecto y a la vez integrarlo en uno de los cursos que se da anualmente en la universidad y así poder crear un proyecto a largo plazo. Mi nombre es Ignacio Gutiérrez, soy biólogo de la Universidad de Costa Rica, muchísimo gusto. Por las ventanas son la segunda causa de mortalidad en aves. Esto lo sabemos por datos de Estados Unidos y Canadá, donde sí se han hecho esta clase de estudios. Estos se hacen a partir de modelos. Estos modelos agarran datos de estudios más pequeños y los expanden para cubrir todo el territorio de Estados Unidos y Canadá. Eso hace que los estudios pequeños en ciudades universitarias, en comunidades, tenga un gran aporte para entender en verdad cómo las ventanas afectan a las aves y las aves migratorias principalmente. ¿Por qué las aves chocan contra las ventanas? Bueno, ellas obviamente intentan volar a través de estas. Las ventanas son una barrera invisible casi para ellas, ya que reflejan el cielo y vegetación circundante, como el ejemplo de esta fotografía que les tengo acá. O las ventanas pueden ser completamente transparentes. Hasta humanos chocamos contra ventanas a veces, accidentalmente. En Latinoamérica tenemos muy pocos estudios acerca de choques de aves con ventanas. Yo encontré 4. Estas son la gran mayoría de estos. Algunos son de muestreos oportunistas, lo cual quiere decir que ellos recogen datos cuando alguien los llama porque encontraron un pájaro muerto y así recogen sus datos. Eso no es una metodología robusta que se pueda repetir. O usan ciencia ciudadana, entre comillas, que hace que los datos estén dispersos en áreas muy diferentes, lo cual hace que no se puedan igualmente repetir sus estudios. Y no hay estudios a largo plazo. La mayoría son a lo más 2 años, igual que este. Este estudio se iba a repetir este año, pero por razones de la pandemia no lo logramos. Nuestros objetivos fueron determinar la abundancia y la diversidad de las especies que impactan contra las ventanas de edificio de la Universidad de Costa Rica durante el 2018-2019 y medir el efecto que tienen las variables arquitectónicas de las fachadas de los edificios en la colisión de las aves. ¿Cómo realizamos este estudio? Realizamos recorridos 3 veces por semana de 6 a 10 a.m. Alrededor de los edificios que están en morado en este mapita a la derecha. La lista de edificios está a la derecha igual. Alrededor de sus edificios hicimos conteos de choques de aves con ventanas y recogimos los cadáveres que estaban en los alrededores y los identificamos a especie. Los análisis de datos usamos correlaciones de Spearman para entender cómo estas variables de los edificios afectan el choque de aves contra las ventanas, y curvas de acumulación de especies para saber cuáles son las especies que más chocan contra ventanas y cómo nos fue en nuestro muestreo. En cuanto a los edificios, hicimos medición de áreas, tanto de ventanas como el concreto de sus fachadas, y los paneles, que son estas estructuras que se ponen en los edificios al frente de sus ventanas para reflejar la luz del sol y bajar las temperaturas dentro de ellos. Estos paneles hacen que no haya un reflejo en las ventanas, lo cual ayuda a que no golpeen tanto las aves. Si alguien está interesado en realizar un estudio de esta clase, existe este documento que lo realizaron los autores del artículo que les enseñé sobre la mortalidad de aves por ventanas, y tiene un montón de mejores prácticas para la recolección de datos más robusta para poder hacer así sus modelos a una escala mayor. Okay. En cuanto a nuestros resultados, encontramos 16 especies en el 2018 y 18 en el 2019. En cuanto a cadáveres, encontramos 40 en el 2018 y 37 en el 2019. Como pueden ver arriba a la derecha, las especies migratorias encontramos un mayor número de especies migratorias que residentes. Entre ambos años fue parecido la cantidad de ambos. En cuanto a cadáveres, podemos ver una diferencia enorme entre residentes y migratorios. Las aves migratorias se ven impactadas muchísimo más fuerte que las residentes. Aquí podemos ver una curva de acumulación de especies a la izquierda, donde se muestra que en el 2018 sí llegamos a este punto donde nuestro muestreo supuestamente encontró todas las especies que necesitábamos. Bueno, todas las especies que en verdad chocaban contra las ventanas. Pero en el 2019 hubo un aumento repentino al final de nuestra fecha de muestreo, y aún así lo extendimos 2 semanas más para ver si podíamos llegar a esta asíntota, pero no lo logramos. Un par de semanas después incluso fuimos aún más, pero no encontramos una sola especie. No sabemos si hubo como un pico o pudo haber sido por una diferencia de las llegadas de las especies al país. Esto debido a desastres naturales que hubieron en las rutas migratorias de estas hacia Centroamérica y el resto de Latinoamérica. En cuanto al número de cadáveres, podemos ver una gran diferencia entre ambos años. La única explicación que se nos ocurre es que hemos visto un declive muy rápido de las especies migratorias en Estados Unidos, y eso pudo afectar la cantidad de individuos que llegaran al país. En cuanto al estatus migratorio, encontramos que en especies residentes, esta especie de paloma Patagivenas flavirostris es la que más estrelló contra ventanas, y encontramos la mayor cantidad de cadáveres de ella. Esta especie es una especie de ocel que se ha visto que tiene características alares que le permiten volar muy rápidamente, pero tiene una maniobrabilidad muy baja, lo cual al tener un accidente con una ventana implica una mayor probabilidad de morir. En cuanto a especies migratorias, podemos ver una gran lista de especies migratorias, muchas especies con poblaciones en declive. En el caso de la especie migratoria que más chocó fue Catarrhus ustulatus. Esta especie se ha visto en otros estudios en Costa Rica, que es la que más choca contra ventanas en general. En nuestro caso también fue en general la especie que más encontramos en ambos años. En el caso de las variables de los edificios, vimos que la gran mayoría de estas áreas y proporciones que medimos dentro de estos edificios no están tan relacionadas con la muerte de aves, pero vimos una pequeña relación entre la proporción de áreas de los paneles en los edificios. Eso es la cantidad de paneles que tiene un edificio por metro cuadrado en sus ventanas. Se ve una ligera tendencia a una reducción en las muertes en promedio durante estos 2 años. Esto se puede explicar debido a que, como aquí pueden ver en estos dos gráficos, en tanto el número de especies a la izquierda como el número de cadáveres a la derecha, el edificio con el mayor número en general en ambos años fue el de ciencias sociales y el edificio con el menor número fue el de ingeniería. Estos dos edificios están colocados en casi uno junto al otro en la Universidad de Costa Rica y tienen variables, tienen características arquitectónicas muy similares, fueron construidos al mismo tiempo, tienen la misma cantidad de pisos, casi tienen la misma cantidad de área de ventanas, pero el edificio de ingeniería tiene una proporción muchísimo más grande de estos paneles de aluminio en sus ventanas, lo cual, si lo ven en estos gráficos, el edificio de ingeniería solo encontramos un individuo y una especie muerta en 2 años de muestreo, aunque son estos dos edificios muy similares entre sí. En conclusiones, encontramos que Catharus ustulatus es la especie más afectada por el choque contra ventanas. Muchas de las soluciones que se creen como stickers o poner pequeñas hojas en las ventanas no fueron funcionales en estos casos. El edificio de ciencias sociales cuenta con stickers y a veces los estudiantes pegan cosas en las ventanas y no pósters o cosas así y no vieron. Aún así encontramos cadáveres en esas ventanas con esos stickers y pósters. Entre los dos edificios a la izquierda podemos ver el de ciencias sociales. Este cuenta con esos paneles, pero una gran proporción de sus ventanas no cuentan con nada, son sus superficies reflectivas que pueden ocasionar la muerte de aves. En cambio, a la derecha podemos ver el edificio de ingeniería, que en verdad una gran proporción de sus ventanas están cubiertas por estos paneles, los cuales pueden en verdad reducir el choque de aves, a la vez que le dan un beneficio al edificio ya que no se calienta y no son tan arquitectónicamente horribles como la gente define algunas de las otras metodologías para prevenir el choque de aves contra edificios. En agradecimientos, quiero agradecer a todos los estudiantes de zoología que por 2 años nos ayudaron con el muestreo. Todos ellos están aquí representados, al menos en nombre. Al profesor Luis Sandoval de la Universidad de Costa Rica, el profesor de ornitología, que fue el que al que llegaron con el problema de las aves muertas en los edificios y se le ocurrió comenzar con este proyecto a largo plazo. Y a los misceláneos de toda la Universidad de Costa Rica que siempre nos ayudaban a buscar aves muertas en sus edificios. Eso sería todo. Muchísimas gracias.
No, muchísimas gracias a ti, Ignacio. Buenísimo tu presentación. Hemos tenido muchas personas que están interesadas en cómo hacer que sus ventanas sean más amigables con las aves, y escuchándote es interesante que muchos de nosotros pensábamos que con stickers puede funcionar, y sí funciona para algunos casos, pero no para todo. ¿Cuál sería tu recomendación como investigador? ¿Cuál sería tu recomendación para hacer una ventana amigable con las aves que funcione para todos?
La investigación actual dice que los stickers como un ave volando no son en verdad funcionales, no genera un cambio en la cantidad de aves que chocan, pero si hay stickers o rayitas o mecates o algo así cada 10 centímetros en una ventana, al menos en las que uno sabe que las aves chocan mucho, en verdad produce una disminución en la cantidad de aves que chocan contra estas. En nuestro edificio de biología tuvimos una ventana donde encontramos 30 choques y 10 cadáveres. Pusimos esta estructura, un palito con mecates cada 10 centímetros. Al siguiente año no encontramos una sola especie muerta.
Buenísimo. Ignacio, eso está muy interesante. También te invito a revisar el chat de esta transmisión en Facebook Live y en YouTube Live y compartir toda esa experiencia, esa bibliografía que tienes. Si tienes alguna especie de manual o una infografía que que ayude a todos a mejorar sus prácticas, para mejorar sus ventanas para las aves. Por favor, déjanoslo saber, todos estamos muy interesados y agradecemos el espacio que dedicaste acá para mostrarnos sobre sus resultados en Costa Rica. Una última cosa también, creo que ¿cómo expandirías viene el mismo tema de las aves con las ventanas, pero ahora lo vamos a ver en inglés con Brian Lees. Él también trabaja con aves y ventanas y en grandes ciudades. Ahora muchas gracias, Ignacio Gutiérrez. Puedes apagar tu ventana, tu micrófono, después de dar tu última recomendación.
En verdad, las ventanas son un grave peligro para las aves migratorias, sobre todo, y nos encantaría poder realizar algo para protegerlas.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Brian Lees. He's going to introduce by Susan Bonfield.
Thank you, Miguel. Yes, we're going to be switching to English now. So our sessions will be in English for the next few hours. After Brian's and the following session, we will have translation again later this afternoon for our Caribbean panel on conservation of migratory birds in the Caribbean region. But I did want to take the opportunity to introduce Brian Lentz. Brian is with the American Bird Conservancy. He wears many hats, but one of them is in his role working on collisions. And so it's a great opportunity to follow up on our previous speaker who was also talking about window collisions. And with that, Brian, I'm going to let you share your screen and you can take it away.
All right. Thank you, Sue. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
All right. Yeah, I could try and do this in Spanish or Portuguese, but you'll understand me better if I just go with English. Well, thank you for having me today. I am the Glass Collision Program Manager for American Bird Conservancy. And today I'm going to kind of go through bird collisions and how you can save birds from colliding with windows. In the United States and Canada, there's a good amount of data on window collisions and threats to birds. And a study came out in 2014 that looked at these, and it found that the #1 human-caused threat to birds, minus habitat loss, were outdoor cats, which kill 2.4 billion birds each year. So if you've got a cat, keep it inside. We could do a whole nother 2-hour talk on that if we wanted to. But #2 on that list were collisions with glass, which kill an estimated 599 million birds each year in the United States. That works out to 1.64 million birds per day. And if you started counting right now and you did not stop, no sleep, no school, no work, it would take you 19 years to count that high. So we are talking about a really big number of birds. In general, there are 2 types of window collisions. High-speed collisions, which is what usually comes to mind. The bird dies or is injured, it pretty much thinks it can fly straight through the glass. That's what we're going to talk about. The second kind are in territorial aggression, where you usually have males that challenge their own reflection in the window because they think it's another bird in their territory. It's annoying if you're sitting in a room where that's happening, but the bird usually doesn't die. We're not going to really talk about that today. Collisions are a conservation issue that everyone has experienced. This really goes to show you the scale of the issue. And there aren't too many things that are an experience with wildlife that every single person has had. It also is, in a way, there's a silver lining here, because you are able to talk to somebody, no matter who it is, about something that they have experienced. You're not trying to convince somebody to save a faraway rainforest or a species of bird they'll never see in their life. Everyone has experienced this. In terms of exactly how many birds hit windows every year in the United States, you hear some people go with 599 or 600 million. Some people say a billion. We at ABC frequently say up to a billion. The study that came up with the estimate was intentionally conservative. So they tried to make sure that they didn't come up with an estimate that was too high. So they actually didn't include some really deadly buildings. In addition to that, there are more and more buildings being built every day. And that study is based on data that is now 5, 10, 15 years old. So there are just more buildings now than there were when that came out. With large numbers like these, people often ask, well, if it really is up to 1 billion birds, why don't I see more? How come there aren't piles of birds I have to step over every time I go outside? There are a few reasons for this. One, they're spread out over a really big number of buildings. Two is that there are all kinds of other things that are out there picking up birds, including people. If you are a store owner and you have 5 dead birds on the sidewalk in front of your store, you go pick them up before people start showing up to go shopping or showing up to go to work. There are also a whole host of animals that will eat these, pretty much anything that is a scavenger, and even some things you wouldn't necessarily think of. So we've got, evidence of crows and seagulls and all kinds of birds picking up dead birds. There are a bunch of mammals, foxes, skunks, opossums, even chipmunks will scavenge dead birds. So they might just disappear because something ate them before you got there. And then the third reason is that many of these birds fall onto rooftops, or they fall into vegetation next to the building, or they fall through a grate in the sewer, or they land in the street. So you just don't see them when you're normally walking around. But once you start looking in these places, you definitely see there are lots of birds there. In terms of the types of birds that hit windows, it's mainly songbirds. So you don't see a lot of ducks and waterfowl or a bunch of raptors hitting windows, although those both do hit windows periodically. Most of the songbirds hit in spring and fall, and they migrate overnight. So they're flying long distances all night long to then land during the daytime, and then they collide with buildings during the daytime. Occasionally they do hit at night when it's dark out, but usually it's a daytime issue. So if you ask people to generally consider what buildings are the worst, if you had to pick one kind of building to fix, what would you go and fix to really address this problem? Most people would say that they would target the tall buildings downtown. And that actually would be the wrong thing to do. High-rise buildings, which are 12 stories and above, actually kill less than 1% of those up to 1 billion birds every year. The buildings that are 1 to 3 stories, which include homes, kill 44%, and low-rise buildings 4 to 11 stories kill 56% of the total. The individual buildings downtown, those tall 12-story and larger buildings, can kill a lot of birds each building, but there just aren't very many buildings that are that big compared to these other two categories. Almost every building is a house or a low-rise building. So if you fixed every skyscraper, you essentially wouldn't make a dent in the problem. We really need kind of an all hands on deck effort to fix every building. So now I'm going to really briefly go into why do collisions happen and what we can do to prevent them. The why collisions happen part could be a lot longer. So if I go too fast, feel free to follow up with me later for more information. Or I recommend checking out some of the resources I have on my final slide. The number one rule that underlies collisions is that the more glass you have, the more collisions you're going to have. And this Apple store in the middle here is all glass. So it's a pretty good example of a building we don't want to see built because it's really deadly for birds. This photo is also a pretty good illustration of how building trends have changed over time. Now, people like to build the all-glass building, which personally I think are pretty boring, and people are actually starting to move away from that a little bit because you can only have so many of those before all your buildings start to look the same. But what you see on the back left is a black and white building that, if I had to guess, was built in the 1970s or 80s. And it's about 50% glass, and the 50% that is there is reflective. So that's better than the Apple store, but it's still potentially problematic. If you go to the building in the very top right, you see a building that I would think was probably built in the 1950s. There is not nearly as much glass overall, and what's there is not shiny and reflective. So that building is not going to be much of a problem. But we don't build a whole lot of buildings that look like that anymore. They all look more like the Apple Store in the middle. In terms of the issues that actually cause a bird to fly into glass, people talk about three general kind of categories. The first is that the glass is reflective, so it shows habitat or sky. It's fairly straightforward. The bird thinks that there is something there that it can go fly to. The second issue is clear glass. Here, the glass is not showing any reflection or very little reflection, but the bird wants to get to what is on the other side. So if you think of a skywalk over a downtown area, or a lobby in a large building that has trees in the atrium, or any window where you can see in one window and out the other one, which is pretty common on a lot of houses. Birds will have no idea that there is a barrier there and will try to fly through. Lighting gets talked about a lot as a driver of collisions. We're still learning more about how this process influences birds. Birds migrate in spring and fall overnight, most of them. So they do big, long flights when it's dark out. And while they're flying at night, they actually can see the Earth's magnetic field. But their ability to see the Earth's magnetic field, we believe, relies on kind of having a dark sky above them. And so you end up sometimes with something called a beacon effect, where you get really, really strong lights on a really dark background. And that throws that ability to see the Earth's magnetic field totally haywire, is what we think. Again, people are still working on these, but we can see this happening. These are the World Trade Center Memorial lights in New York City on the bottom right. And if you look on the left-hand side there, each one of those little white dots that you see in the beams of light is a bird that has flown into the beam of light and is just circling and kind of stuck there. There are groups that will monitor, and when there are too many birds that are stuck, they shut the lights off. And within a period of minutes, 10 or 20 minutes, all those birds are gone. So they are able to reorient themselves and start migrating again. However, conditions like this, they used to exist a long time ago, but now it's pretty hard to find something where the beacon effect will work. This is an aerial shot of the city of Houston, which is 10,000 square miles. And if you went into downtown in the middle of that and turned off the 5 brightest lights, you still have a really big footprint of light. So the other way that lighting works is that places like the city of Houston and anywhere that has bright lights will just kind of draw birds in. So they won't get stuck in any of these lights in the city of Houston because there's not a beacon effect going on, but they're more likely to end their migration flight at the end of the night and land in the middle of the city where there are lights. And then they spend the whole next day foraging among trees surrounded by windows. So it ends up drawing birds into what I like to call a forest of glass. And this doesn't have to be a city size of Houston. It works even like along freeways that have lighting and in suburbs and in smaller areas that don't have massive amounts of lighting. You will see birds concentrated wherever there is light. But the light itself isn't usually causing the collision. It's just putting the bird in proximity with glass. Birds and people see the world in really different ways, which explains part of the reason this happens. Just really basically, if you think about where your eyes are positioned versus where the eyes of most birds are positioned, you can see on the upper right, your eyes are in front of your face, and the field of view, or what each of your eyes can see, has an overlap. So each of your eyes gives your brain the same signal, and your brain can use that to judge what's in front of you and how far away from you it is. So we have really good depth perception. We can see things in front of us really, really well, but we don't see very well off to the sides of our face because our attention is focused forward. If you think about most birds, like the robin here, which are the 3 pictures in the center on the left, their eyes are on the sides of their head. So if a robin wants to look at you, it has to turn its head sideways. If you look at the picture on the bottom in the middle, which is looking straight down the robin's beak, it probably doesn't see you very well with its head that way. The exception for birds are raptors, like the bald eagle on the bottom right. Those birds need to be able to hunt prey and detect where things are. So they are like people. They have their eyes in the front of their head, and they actually have better vision in front of them than we do. Although the raptors do still sometimes hit windows for reasons we'll talk about in a minute. So the upper left here is an illustration of the Earth's magnetic field, which we covered briefly. The bottom left is kind of the follow effect of the eye position that we just talked about. That is meant to show something called contrast sensitivity. So how well you're able to detect a pattern. Because birds' eyes, for most species, focus out to the side and not very much in front, their ability to see patterns in front of them is not very good. People's ability to see patterns in front of us is really good. So any pattern in front of them that a bird can see, we can see every single one of those. We can see 100% of them. So that means if you want to put a pattern on glass or a window so that a bird doesn't hit it, people are going to see every single one of those patterns that will be effective in preventing a collision. It would be great if it worked the other way, because then we could do a bunch of stuff that would be invisible to people. The one potential area where we actually might be able to do things that are invisible to people is with ultraviolet light. If you look on the bottom there, these are the different peak wavelengths that eyes are able to detect. The top shows what humans can see, but on the bottom you can see there's another peak there around 370 nanometers, and that is ultraviolet. So there are species of birds that can see ultraviolet light. It's not all species of birds, but many of the songbirds that we're worried about can see what we just call UV light. So there is a possibility to make patterns in UV that will prevent some of this, but they have to be really strong, and it's a little bit more difficult to figure out what will work and what won't, because we can't just look at it and kind of come up with a good estimate of if it's going to work or not, because we can't see it. I'll show you a few examples of that at the end. The other thing quickly to mention is that birds can see polarized light, which is a brand new area of research. Probably won't have a whole lot to do with window collisions, but we're still working to figure that out. So people think they can see glass. This is funny, but we don't see glass. So a lot of people will say, oh, that stupid bird, why did it hit the window? People do this all the time. Everybody has bumped their head on a sneeze guard or walked into a screen door, and it's worth watching this again. She's not on her phone. She's not talking to anybody. She's not looking at anything. All she wants to do is leave the shopping center, and she can't do it because we don't see glass, and birds don't see glass either. What people see, if this will stop, it's if you want to waste a good half hour, go and look at YouTube and look for people running into glass. There's a lot of funny stuff. So people think we can see glass, but we don't. If you consider the picture on the right, the only reason that you can understand that one of those windows is open is because you see the open window. If I took something and covered up the open window, those other three windows look the same to you. So you can't tell one of them doesn't have glass and the other two do. What you do is you pick up on the cue or the signal of the open window. That's the same thing with the kid on the bottom there. He is old enough that he understands the concept or the idea of glass and knows that if you have a window frame inside your house, there's glass in it. If he didn't understand that, he would never do that because you would assume you would fall straight out and probably get badly hurt. A good example of people starting to understand that people don't actually see glass is with places like on the upper left. You get office buildings being built with glass walls on the inside. And instead of building them perfectly clear, they're starting to put patterns and dots on them. You see a dot at about eye level for a kid and dots at about eye level for an adult. And those dots are not there necessarily to make the windows look more attractive. They're there to let people know that there's a window there. Otherwise, people walk into those kinds of walls. It's also important to remember that it's not just a traditional window in your house. Bus stops and building connectors and walkways, The upper right is a picture of what we call here a gazebo. People make conference rooms that way. On the bottom are noise and sound barriers along freeways and highways. People are starting to make all these things clear. And if you think about the issues of reflection and being see-through and also being put where birds are, these things are all terrible because they can be see-through, reflective, and they're where birds are flying anyway. So these are kind of no-brainer structures. People use glass railings a lot too. As far as I'm concerned, there should never be a glass railing. But these are all things that should always be bird-friendly no matter where you build them. It used to be that the solution to window collisions was to just put a decal of a hawk in the middle of your window and think you were done because the hawk would scare birds away. And that actually doesn't work. The only way that a hawk decal will work is if you cover your window in hawk decals, because putting one up there will just keep a bird from hitting the hawk decal, but the rest of your window is about the same. So in an effort to advance beyond that and make sure that the solutions we're talking about are going to work, people started doing tunnel testing. There's a tunnel in Austria, and ABC has our own tunnel at the Powder Mill Nature Reserve in Pennsylvania. And we take live birds that are caught during their banding operation and put them in at the end of the tunnel where you see the people standing there. And at the far end of the tunnel, which we'll see on the next slide, we have two panes of glass that are next to each other. One is clear and one is what we're testing, which you can see on the upper right there. And we fly one bird at a time down the tunnel, and there's another net in front so they don't actually hit the glass. And we record which way the birds fly. So we know if they're flying only to the clear pane and not towards the one with the pattern on it, we know that they're seeing the pattern and choosing not to fly into that and trying to use the other window. The bottom left there shows you what they see. They want to get out of there, and so they fly towards that to try and get out. So then you can come up with a score and be pretty confident that the pattern is something that a bird can see and react to. The solutions you actually come up with and the patterns you create have to be pretty tight and pretty visible, because birds are really agile and able to go through really tight spaces. If you think about, you can see the swallow on the right there flying at full speed through a tiny gap where it has to put its wings vertical to even get through it. You can think about birds going into and out of a nest cavity. They don't want to sit there and advertise that their nest is in there. They do that kind of stuff quickly. Or flying through trees to get away from a predator or find food. The spaces that birds use are tight, which means that the window patterns have to be pretty tight themselves. So you need a visible pattern that birds see as a real barrier. We now talk about the 2x2 rule, which is 2 inches by 2 inches. It used to be the 2x4 rule, but we are starting to talk about it being a little narrower because 4 inches is not a great barrier for smaller birds. So pretty much the 2x2 rule means that any pattern you've got should have 2 inches of spacing between the pattern elements. So in this case here, it's illustrated with lines. So these lines would be 2 inches apart. And if you had the right kind of lines 2 inches apart, you're going to prevent almost every bird from thinking that they can fly through that, so your window collisions will stop. The pattern elements, so in this case the lines, should be at least 1/8 of an inch. If you're going to switch to something like dots or a shape that's not a line, you're probably going to want to make them 1/4 inch or bigger so that they cover enough for the birds to see the glass. So these kind of rules kind of underlie a lot of the solutions that we'll show in a minute here. If you think about how to address window collisions, you have two real options. One is to focus on new construction. So looking at brand new buildings and how do you design a new building that's bird friendly. The second way is to try and fix all of the existing buildings. For new construction, which we'll just do for one slide because I don't think that's the main focus of anybody watching today. There are a couple ways to do it. There are a number of different sets of bird-friendly building guidelines. You could pass an ordinance. New York City passed one. It hasn't gone into effect yet. where they give architects pretty much a series of design steps to take to build a bird-friendly building. The U.S. Green Building Council has a program called LEED, which certifies buildings for being environmentally friendly and green. They have something called SSPC 55, which is a bird collision deterrence credit. It's optional, but that is, again, another set of guidelines for how to build a building that is not going to cause a lot of collisions. ABC teaches architects. We have an American Institute of Architects course that we teach for continuing education. So there are ways to make new buildings bird friendly in the design phase, and it's always cheapest to do it at this point. You're already doing design, you're already purchasing materials, and once you buy the right kind of material that is built to deter collisions, you're done. You don't have to do it. They don't wear out. The same is not true of existing buildings. If you only focused on new buildings, all you're really doing is hitting pause on that 1 billion birds a year until you've replaced every single building. So we need to address new buildings and also the buildings that we currently inhabit and use. Existing buildings present some different challenges though. You usually can't change the materials. So your building is built, the windows are there. You can't usually just change out the windows. Sometimes windows fail or are going to be replaced to have something that is more energy efficient put in. In those cases, you can actually do it when it doesn't really add cost, but that's not normal. There are also a big range of costs in the solutions we're going to talk about, so that can be a factor. Effort, you have to actually get outside and put these things up or have someone do it for you. And then you also have to kind of figure out what's causing your collision. There are a lot of variables that influence collisions, everything we just talked about, plus a bunch more, like this slide, which shows you that the reason collision happens might not be the same state that you see the window. So one window can be perfectly clear at one time of the day, reflect sky at another, and reflect trees and vegetation at another time. And the strength of those reflections can depend on the time of the day, where the sun is, how cloudy or overcast it is, or the angle that you're using to look at the window. So it can be hard to know what's causing your problem. There's also something called channeling, which is where vegetation or flyways can create kind of a channel or a funnel that makes birds all fly through one single spot or pathway. And if you have glass at the end of that pathway, you're going to have a problem. An easy way to think about this is if you have an intersection that is a T intersection. So you've got two streets that meet in the letter T. In the street leading up to the top, if it's lined in trees and vegetation and you have a big glass wall at the top, all of the birds are going to be funneled into that one part of the building. Planted courtyards and atria can also be bad. A bird flying over will look down at this and see green and water and trees and drop down into there. But when it's time to leave, they look around and they see all of the reflected vegetation in the windows and thinks that's the way out. They don't think that they need to fly straight up to get out of there. Food and water resources are also something that can create a window collision problem. So if you've got a feeder or a bird bath or a tree that produces fruit in your yard that the birds love, the windows across from those kinds of things are probably going to be the biggest collision spots you have on your building. So we say always treat the windows across from a feeder or bird bath or anything else that is going to draw birds into using one particular spot a lot. It's a really quick way to address a big part of your problem. So for existing buildings, you know, if you say, all right, well, I need to fix my windows, you could either just do all of them, which would be great, but also is a lot of effort and a lot of work and a lot more cost. So we don't expect anybody to just go out and do all of the windows. So our goal for an existing building is to fix the bad windows or the problem windows and leave the rest of them. If you can fix 90 or 95% of your collision problem by doing 15% of your windows, I would say do the 15% and don't worry about the rest. So we've got a couple steps that you can follow to make sure that you do this efficiently and effectively. The first is to do lights out. So you turn your lights off from midnight until after sunrise. So you just don't turn them back on until the next evening. That will be your contribution towards preventing those lighting effects that we talked about earlier. And it's not a hard thing to do. Most people don't need their lights on at 3 in the morning. And it also saves energy. You'll see at the bottom there, though, that the glass is more important than the lighting. So if you have to pick doing the lighting or doing the glass, you do the glass. The lighting is just a lot easier, and it also saves money. The second through fifth steps, we'll talk a little bit about more in the coming slides, but the first one is to pay attention. So you have to figure out which windows birds are hitting. Then the next step, once you know what your problem windows are, you have to come up with the plan. You have to figure out why they're hitting and what you're going to do. Then you take a step and fix those windows. But that doesn't mean you're done. That means you keep paying attention and keep monitoring. So you repeat those steps until you don't hear birds hitting windows anymore, and then you're finished. So for the pay attention or the monitoring your building step, you might already know what windows are deadly for birds. If you've heard a bird hit a window before, you don't need to wait. Just put something up on that one. Put one of these solutions on that window because another bird will hit it in the future. That is the really easy first thing. Then after that, you can walk the building in the morning, at 9 or 10 a.m. and look below the windows to see if there are birds there. Spring and fall migration is a great time to do this because you have more birds in your location in spring and fall than you do at any other time, because you've got all the birds that are resident plus all of the migrants coming through. You can monitor year round though, and birds do hit windows 365 days of the year. So paying attention every day is a good idea. If you've got a building that kills a lot of birds, having a plan for the injured birds you find is a good idea. So if there's a rehabilitator or a veterinarian or somebody that you know that could help an injured bird, it's a good idea to know who they are and talk to them about bringing birds in, especially if you're going to do this for a large number of buildings, because you will end up with a large number of injured birds. ABC has a monitoring plan that's in development and almost done that we will be posting on our new website relatively soon. So you can kind of see how monitoring works if you want to get really in depth in terms of doing a big project. But if you're just doing your house or a single location, paying attention is good enough, and walking the building perimeter once a day is even better. So in terms of planning your solution, you have to figure out what the problem is. We talked about whether it's likely to be a reflection or see-through glass. If it's see-through and you've got birds seeing like in your front window and out your back window, and they see all of the trees in your backyard, sometimes it can be as easy as pulling the shades on one of those two windows so that birds can't see through your house anymore. So kind of paying attention to and trying to figure out what the problem is can be beneficial for coming up with a good solution. Looking at landscaping and resources, so where your trees are and where your bird feeder is and those things can also be an influence that you might be able to do something about. Instead of putting your bird feeders in front of your huge picture window, you might be able to put it off to the side so there's not a direct flight path to your window. If you're going to actually use a solution where you're putting something on the glass, you have to figure out what's the total area, how many windows do I need to treat, how much money do I want to spend, can I install this myself, and how long do I want my solution to last. At the bottom in yellow is that the outside of the glass is always best. So don't put it on the inside, because the reflection on the outside of the glass can make things on the inside invisible. The outside is always where you want to put everything. So now we're going to go through some of the solutions really quickly. There are more than this, and you can find more on our website. The link is on the last slide. Maybe the easiest one is to use an insect screen or a bug screen on the outside of your window. If you look at the windows on the left there, the one with the insect screen on it has almost no reflection, whereas the one without it is really reflective. And if you did that, we consider that window done and to be bird friendly. The screen also gives a little bit of a cushion if a bird actually does hit the window. It may not save the bird's life, but for some collisions, it might. One thing to think about too is if you look at those two windows there, the one on the right on the bottom, there are 3 black lines of tape, which you probably didn't notice until I pointed them out. If you're going to put up a solution, you need to take a step back and think, does it show up on the window? And black tape on this one would not be a very effective prevention method unless you used a lot of it. But if that tape was white, it would show up really clearly and be a good deterrent. There's something called tempera paint, which is a cheap non-toxic paint. That's what kids use at school. If you've got a school or a nature center, or you're stuck at home with your kids for COVID for a year, not that I know anything about that, you can have a project where you paint the window. It will eventually wash off and you'll have to do it again, but it's a fun way to keep your windows bird friendly. That's not a solution for, like an office building or places that don't want that kind of appearance, but it is a solution. American Bird Conservancy has bird tape, which we're about to put back on the market. It hasn't been available for the last year, which is a clear translucent tape that goes on the outside of the window. And if you follow the instructions, that will be highly effective at reducing collisions. I have put that up on windows and I can guarantee you it'll work. There's another product called an Acopian Bird Saver, which is also a Zen wind curtain. Those are hanging rope that have little weights at the bottom so they hang straight, and you attach it at the top of the window and let the cords hang. You can attach it at the bottom too. These are highly effective because it's actually a 3D, it's not on the window, it's actually in front of the window. The Acopian website also has instructions on how you can make your own. These were used at the Arenal Observatory Lodge and Spa in Costa Rica. And we have a testimonial here that talks about it being a perfect solution for them. It reduced their collisions to about 1 a year. And they said most of their guests, or many of their guests, don't even notice that they're there. And the ones who do and ask, many of them ask how they can get these for their own house. So you don't need to be afraid that people are going to start not liking your windows if you put these on. Most won't notice, and those who do will think it is a good thing. There is another solution called a bird crash preventer, which is on the upper left there. That is kind of a clear, like more or less thick fishing line screen that goes on the outside. Again, that's 3D, so it's not actually on the window, it's in front. The 2 other products on this page are ultraviolet reflecting decals. The packages say they can go on the inside of your window, and we say they should go on the outside. And they also, on the packages, don't generally say that the spacing is enough. So if you have one big window and you put one of these in the middle, you're not really going to make that big of a difference. But if you have a big window and you put a number of them up, they will be effective. There are a number of products called vinyl window films. So this is pretty much a sticker that covers your whole window, and companies can make whatever pattern you want to be in that sticker. Some of them, the one on the bottom right is a product called Feather Friendly. You can get that. It doesn't actually come as a full sticker. It comes as only those little white dots. So you put on a backing and then you pull the back of it off and it leaves only the white dots on your window. And those are effective, and they have a solution for homes too. So there's one of those that is made for homeowners. It's not just all for large buildings. There's another product called Kaleidoscape, which is bus wrap. If you think about like seeing a bus in the city and looking at it from outside, there are ads on the outside of the bus that are printed on. But when you're on the bus on the inside and you look out, you can see out the window. Well, that is this product. It essentially takes a window and makes it from the outside not look like a window anymore. That's not a solution for everybody, but if that's something that would work for you, this is highly effective. You can put up netting as well. Again, this is not a solution that a lot of places would choose, but if it works for you, you know, we will take any solution that that somebody will put up. The netting has to be thick enough that the birds can see it, and it has to be tight. If it's loose, birds will get stuck in there, and we don't want a bird flying into that and getting stuck because it died stuck in the net. It's got to be tight so that if they do hit it, they will bounce off. You might hear people say, pull the shades, and will that work? It depends. Sometimes pulling the shades actually makes the reflection stronger because it makes it more uniform. You get rid of the differentiation in the background and make it look like a solid image. If you've got blinds like in the bottom picture there, the Venetian blinds, the ones you can turn, you should always leave them partway open. If they're all the way open or all the way closed, that reflection looks a lot stronger than if they're part way open. So if you've got these kinds of blinds, your window solution could be free. It might not be enough still to prevent a bird from flying into that reflection, but it is definitely worth trying, and it will definitely prevent at least some of your collisions. So these are pictures of a couple of the UV ultraviolet products that are out there. The one on the bottom left and the bottom, or the top left and the bottom right, are being, they have a fluorescent flashlight shown on them so that you can see the pattern. What they actually look like is the top right and the bottom left. It looks more or less clear to people. Again, these are not solutions for every bird because lots of birds don't see ultraviolet light, but for those that do, this is a solution, and it's perfectly clear, which is what architects like the best. It's also important as a solution to collisions to educate people. So if you put these on your windows, make sure your friends see it when they come over. You will have people come over even after you put it up that won't notice you did it. I have some on my house, and I had a nanny coming over to watch my kids, and we put them on the room she spent almost all her day in, and it took 3 days for her to notice that the windows were different. So you might have to point it out to your friends, but you know, make sure you're doing education on this issue too. Especially if you have a business, being green looks great. We often also hear a complaint that I don't want to interfere with the view. I don't want anything on my windows. Well, if you look at the two pictures on the bottom, the one on the left has bird savers on it, the Acopian bird saver, and the one on the right has those little white dots from Feather Friendly. And you can still see out those windows just fine. So it really doesn't interfere with your view. So I'd like to say thank you for inviting me to speak today. I have a couple things to point out on this final slide. I would invite everybody to become a member of ABC so you can start seeing our communications. The top resource there is birdsmartglass.org. That link takes you to our current website that has a list of all of these products on it. We're about to launch a brand new website where the list of those products is going to be 1,000 times better, and there are going to be a lot of new resources for you to prevent collisions, help pass an ordinance, all these different things. So I invite you to visit the website. And if you go today, make sure you keep going back because the new one is going to be a much better site. And then the final thing I will say is we have a collisions newsletter that we send out by email. And the link on the bottom there will take you so you can sign up for that. And we send those out several times a year with a bunch of collision news and updates. And feel free to send me an email at any time with collision or questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was amazing.
We just learned a bunch of things too.
We're unmuted too. Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. We both just learned so much right now. We're actually a couple of things in there that I don't know if they're new information or I just missed it when they came out. We did have one question come in, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer it or not, but one person was asking about the scientific collections and if when birds are, I know a lot of people will collect birds that have hit windows and then they go into scientific collections. Do the scientific collections actually make a notation that that is how they were killed? Do you know?
A lot of them do. They're actually, so the city of Chicago has a program or a group called the Chicago Collision Monitors that have been picking up collision victims in downtown Chicago for like 20 years. And theirs all go to the Field Museum in Chicago, and they're partnered with the Field Museum. So they've got this huge collection of birds that are tagged as having been a window collision. And they actually use that data set and those birds to do something completely unrelated to collisions. They published a paper about how birds' wing sizes are changing based on changes in climate, because they have this huge database of collision birds that they wouldn't have otherwise. So I think a lot of places do record that they were collisions. If it's not affiliated with a program and someone just brings in 5 dead birds, they might not be. But I think most of them do take that information.
Yeah, that's good that they were able to use it that way, but a regrettable way to gather the data.
Yeah.
So another question for you, when you have those conversations, and you brought it up also, when people say, oh, I don't want to break out my window, how do you convince people to take that next step to do something about their windows?
I think a lot of it depends on how you start the conversation. So when I'm talking to architects, I say, well, there are kind of 2 ways to do this. You can design it and show the client, or you can say, I designed it and these are the things that make it bird friendly. And if you do that, you're going to get some people who go, I don't want all that junk on my windows and I don't like those patterns. Whereas if they just look at it differently and think, hey, this is the architect's vision, and look, isn't that a beautiful pattern and it makes my building look different, they're okay with it. So it is difficult to have that conversation. Examples like the one I gave of someone sitting in my house for 3 days before they noticed are, I've got a long list of those that we then can bring up. And we're actually working with a new research team at Carnegie University that studies how people perceive patterns and what people like and what they don't like and what they think is kind of obtrusive and blocking their view. So that we're going to be able to write a whole lot that is going to have a whole lot of evidence behind it to show people that people actually don't mind these patterns, especially if they know what they're for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a really important aspect of this. And I think, a lot of people just have not tried it. So I appreciate that comment. I know.
Well, and you really don't, sorry to interrupt you there, but you really don't notice. So the ones I put on my house, my wife right away noticed them, but now we don't see them anymore. It's just, you're looking out the window just as you would.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. We put them here in our office and we don't notice them anymore either. So big glass doors. I know you've had some great successes with your work with some of the big facilities that have a lot of glass on them. Could you speak a little bit about maybe 1 or 2 of those?
Let's see. What do I pick? Probably, well, there are 3 things I would mention. One is working with communities to pass a law or an ordinance that requires everybody to build bird-friendly buildings. That's really the best way to do this, because it's really time-consuming to talk to a building project one at a time. There are just too many buildings and too many projects and too many architects to go one at a time. So passing an ordinance or a law that just requires it is a really great use of anyone's time. And we're going to have new resources to walk you through how you can go out and do that yourself. For specific building projects, I worked with the Milwaukee Bucks, who are an NBA basketball team, on their new building, which opened in 2018, I believe. And they got that lead credit that I mentioned, the SSPC 55 credit. They designed a bird-friendly sports arena, a $500 million project. And then for existing buildings, we've been working with Northwestern University in Chicago on monitoring their campus. And then for the monitoring, figuring out what the worst buildings are. And then for those buildings, what the worst parts of the worst buildings are. And then putting up those retrofits to, fix 80% of the problem on as many buildings as you can. So large institutions are willing to do this. It just takes, you know, education and somebody willing to go and make the approach.
Yeah, that's great. So when you say bird-friendly buildings and having those regulations, does that include homes?
Most of the legislation and ordinances don't. New York City actually did. So I keep talking about theirs because New York City said that every building from a house in the suburbs to a 100-story tall building in downtown, no matter the building, if you go from the ground to 75 feet high, 90% of the glass has to be bird friendly. So it's really kind of a game-changing law because there are a lot of buildings in New York, and it also applies if you're doing a really significant retrofit. So if you're going to do a renovation to your building and get new windows to become more energy efficient, it applies to those new windows too. You don't have to change windows if you're not doing it anyway, but if part of the plan is to change windows, you know, the law goes into effect. But most ordinances don't, and most ordinances actually don't even include all of the larger buildings. They find ways to make it apply to a subset of buildings, and I'm always there arguing, nope, make it bigger, make it bigger.
Yeah, that's great. Well, any final words, Brian? I sure appreciate your coming on. It was perfect timing coming after our previous presenters' talks, so I thought that was really wonderful to have one in Spanish and one in English.
No, I'm just, you know, thank you to everybody who's out there and paying attention to this, and you know, you can make a real difference. You know, the more times, you know, for raising money from somebody for conservation, there's kind of a rule of 7 points of contact. So you have to have heard from somebody 7 times before they would actually consider supporting what you're doing. The same thing kind of applies for this. I'll just close with an example of my neighbor. I have a neighbor and they are bird watchers and they have bird feeders, and we moved in and they thought, oh, hey, you're cool. You know a lot of stuff. And then they saw my windows and they thought, what's that? And I told them what it was for. They didn't do anything. Then the Milwaukee Bucks news was all over the news. So they heard about the Milwaukee Bucks doing it. They didn't do anything. But then they went to the Milwaukee County Zoo. They went to the zoo with their kids, and a lot of the zoo exhibits have the same kinds of stuff on them, and they saw it. And then she came home and she said, I saw your dots on the glass at the zoo. We're going to buy them.
Your dots.
So yeah, they became mine. But it took 3 times, more than that really, because they see me all the time.
Right.
Before it became something they would do. So the more you get out there, everybody, and the more you talk about this and have your windows as an example, the easier it's going to be and the more people who will do it. So you really can make a difference. This is something that we need everybody to do.
That's wonderful. And yeah, just so everybody knows, just a moment, I'm going to turn our next video off. We were able to get that bird tape. So I didn't know, we do have some here at Environment for the Americas that if people are interested in purchasing that, we do have some you can purchase, and we find it to be very effective. So I'm glad to hear it's back on the market. If it was
almost.
Okay, but we have some, even if it's off in other places.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brian. We do need to go to our next presentation, but I want to thank you for your time and for joining us. That was great. Really.
All right, well, thank you.
All right. We'll have you take down your screen, and then we'll go to our next presentation. So our next presentation is Christine Elder, and Christine will be joining us. She is an artist from the Caribbean, and she is doing a live session on how to draw birds using one of our World Migratory Bird Day focal species, which is the pintail duck, northern pintail, I'm sorry. And we're going to try this because we're going to join as a participant, and we'll see if this will work for all of you as well so that you can participate with us.
All about the biology of the pintail for about a half hour, and then you can follow along with my sketching workshop, and we're going to be sketching them. So we're going to be here's our sketch. So all you need is a pencil and a paper, and if you do have a moment to download the high resolution pintail duck image, you can do that at the link below. So okay, let's get started.
That seems to be working.
Okay. Are we ready, Lisa?
I am ready. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today. I saw somebody in the chat box said that they were having a strange effect with the sound, Christine. Oh, she said it solved the issue. She's all set. That's great. All right, so let's get going. We've got a lot to cover, and I'm really excited to be talking to you today. Let me just get my slides started here. All right, so thanks again for joining us. Welcome. Today we are starting our celebration. Well, we're actually celebrating World Migratory Bird Day during the whole month of September and October in many parts of the Americas, especially in the Caribbean and Latin America and South America, but also in North America. Although in North America we tend to focus on the celebration in the spring when birds are returning home. Right now, birds are migrating south to their wintering grounds. And so in the Caribbean, we celebrate in the fall. And this is a poster that that Environment for the Americas prepared with 15 species to learn about. These are all long distance migrants, and they're called focal species, and you can learn about each one of them on migratorybirdday.org. And then just a little bit of background about my organization. I work with a nonprofit called Birds Caribbean, and our mission is to raise awareness and promote sound science and empower our partners to build a region where people appreciate and conserve and benefit from bird populations and ecosystems. So I think
moment. I don't see your slides.
You're not seeing my slides. Oh, wait a second. I'm so sorry.
You got to go screen share.
Share my screen first. Yes, good point. All right, here we go.
If you can't do that, we can do that on my end.
Okay, no, everything should be good. All right, hold on 1 second. Let's see if this works. Do you see it now?
No, not yet. Let me,
okay, hold on 1 second.
Betty, let me first remind people about how we roll today. We forgot to do that. So basically, oh, here we go.
All right, this is it. Good.
Just a second. We're on my slideshow.
Okay, that's fine.
How we're going to roll today is, like I mentioned, the resources are down below where it says download your pintail duck image, and that's where you would be able to print out the image we're going to use for the sketching tutorial part that's going to happen in about a half hour. There is a chat box. Now, if you're on Facebook, I believe you might be able to chat as well, or if you're on Crowdcast over here, you can chat. Love to hear where you're from in the world and if you've ever seen a northern pintail before. So then we're going to go over the biology and ecology and anatomy of the pintail with Lisa. And in about 30 minutes, we're going to do the art lesson where we're going to draw the northern pintail with me. And the most fun part is at the end, if we have time, we can have you guys up on screen and sharing your sketches, or just asking any questions you want to of Lisa or me about pintails or how to draw them. Okay, so let me get out of my slideshow and see if we can see Lisa's. So are you sharing yet?
I'm gonna do that right now. Hold on.
No worries.
Hold on a second. Are you, yeah, here we go. Do you see it now?
Nope.
You're not seeing my screen. Okay, hold on. It looks like you're still screen sharing, Christine, no?
No.
All right, let me try one more time.
If you're looking at the Facebook feed, it's a few seconds behind, so.
Yeah.
We're just looking at the northern lights.
All right, here we go. Sorry for the technical delays. How about now?
Nope.
You're still not seeing my screen? Sure? All right, just let's give it a couple seconds. Anything?
Oh. Nope.
It's coming up.
Nope. That was me testing mine. So let's go ahead and use mine, and all you do is just say next. Is that okay?
Okay, that's fine.
Good. Alrighty. So we're going to just a sec. This is so much fun. This is okay. No problem whatsoever. And so we'll start with about Birds Caribbean. Just a minute. Let me just.
I think I know what happened. And can we try one more time?
Okay. One more time.
So are these your slides, or these your slides or my slides? Those are your slides.
Yeah, sorry, I was just getting ready.
Okay. So I think
let's just go ahead, Lisa.
Okay, 1 second. Anything coming up? Okay. All right, you go ahead and share your screen then. I think I know what happened. I switched to using Chromecast from Safari, and so I maybe
we're going to be doing that. No.
Yep. Okay, go ahead.
Just a minute.
Yep.
Okay, so you can see your slideshow on your own screen, right?
Yep, we're good.
So we're on Connect Our World.
We're celebrating World Migratory Bird Day. This is a poster that Environment for the Americas has set up and is available. There's lots of interesting facts about these vocal species that you see on the screen, including the northern pintail, which we're talking about today. Next. So I'm with Birds Caribbean, and we're a nonprofit that's dedicated to conserving birds and nature throughout all the islands of the Caribbean. I encourage you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and check us out on YouTube. Next. And on our website, we are, for a celebration of World Migratory Bird Day, we are releasing a Migratory Bird of the Day. So we're posting fun natural history facts. We have coloring pages, online puzzles, and activities for kids and adult, bird videos and calls and recordings, drawing webinars like this one that we're doing today, and lots of special events. And today, tomorrow, and Saturday on Environment for the Americas website is Bird Day Live. And hopefully some of you are watching us now on Facebook. But today we have a Caribbean focus, and we'll be talking about the northern pintail today. Next. Okay, so northern pintails. These are ducks that are in the family Anatidae, which is the family that has all the ducks, geese, and swans of the world. And maybe you can think of a few geese and swans that you know. Maybe put in the chat box if you know any other geese and ducks and swans from being outside and going birding. So dabbling ducks are in the genus Anis, and there's actually 45 species in this genus worldwide. Next. Some other species in this genus you might recognize, the mallard and the blue-winged teal. The mallard is probably the most familiar duck. It's super common. The male has that bright green head, and then in the bottom picture you can see the blue-winged teal. Next slide. That's the male and the female. Oh, and of course we all are very familiar with Daffy Duck, one of our cartoon characters. Next. So, how do we know this is a northern pintail? What makes a duck mallard? Well, write in the chat box if you can think of some characteristics that ducks have. What's unique about ducks? Well, you can notice a couple things right away from this picture. They're on the water, so they're adapted to living on the water. Yeah, you're right. Donald Duck was in the last picture. They have webbed feet, and that's an adaptation for swimming, of course. The northern pintail, all ducks have a flattened bill, Okay, so it's flattened and it's adapted for feeding in the water and sifting through mud and finding seeds and little invertebrates to eat. So they have, northern pintails have a blue-gray bill, and then they have a central black stripe down the middle. They have a chocolate brown head. They have a white neck and breast with a stripe going up the back of the neck. They're a very slender duck. They're medium-sized. They have a slender neck and body. On their sides, they have the what look like gray flanks with vermiculation. It's like this very fine pattern of like swirls on the sides of their body, and then they have that white spot toward the rear, which is a good way to spot the duck as well. And you can see that they have elongated scapulars and tertials on their back, and then of course 2 very long central tail feathers that are black, and that gives it their name, the pintail. And this is what a breeding male looks like. Next. All right, another thing to notice about this duck, the male has iridescence on the back of his head. It's kind of a purplish, glossy sheen. And when he's courting the female, he'll swim away from her and turn his head this way and that way so that the light catches the feathers and the iridescence shows up. And it's another way that the male uses to attract the attention of the female. And you might know of iridescence, it's most well known in hummingbirds. They have that gorget, and where it looks black if it's not shining in the light, but if they turn their head, you can the iridescence shows up, and it's a structural color where the light is hitting the proteins in the feather and causing this shimmering color. Next. All right, and what's different about ducks also is if you look closely at their wings, you can see the primary feathers, which are the outer feathers, the flight feathers, and then the secondary feathers, which are the inner feathers. And there's an area on the secondary feathers called the speculum, and that is unique to ducks. And it's really helpful for ID, especially when the birds are in flight, because most species have a unique speculum. They have different colors on their wings. So on the northern pintail, it's kind of like a greenish or bronze, and it's bordered by a buffy color on the front edge and then black, and then you can see a white trailing edge. So when ducks are in flight, you can see that. On the mallard, you can see there it's very purplish. He has a white trailing edge and white on top. And then even on the pintail, the female, you can see the white trailing edge. She's flapping her wings there in the lower left. So it's the duck speculum is unique, and that can be really helpful in ID. All right, next slide. And you can see here a gorgeous male in prime breeding plumage. He's sitting here preening. Ducks spend quite a lot of time preening, just like other birds, and they do this for a number of different reasons. They're dipping their bill into their oil gland, which is at the base of their tail. And so they're oiling their feathers, and they're lining all the barbs on the feathers, and this keeps the feathers nice and smooth and in shape, and it keeps them so that the ducks are waterproof. You know, if you notice the duck splashing around, you'll see droplets of water landing on its back and just rolling off. And so this is part of their waterproofing to keep them warm and dry on the inside. And when they're preening, they're also removing parasites and body lice and things like that. So it's really just working to keep their plumage in tip-top shape. Next. Okay, so one thing to notice is that many dabbling ducks, like a lot of other birds, are sexually dimorphic. And what this means is that males and females look different. And often in the bird world, males are very brightly colored, and it's the females that are more drab and more plain colored. So that is true in many species of ducks. The males are the brightly colored sex. And so within ducks, the females are often just mottled shades of different brown. They're still very beautiful, but just much more subdued colors. And why do you think that female ducks would be so drab brown? Write in the chat box why you think that's important. Okay, next. And if you're thinking about the fact that the female birds are the ones that lay eggs, they build a nest, they lay eggs, and they're often the ones to raise young, it makes sense because they want to be camouflaged from predators. They want to be sort of earthy tones so that they blend in with the vegetation and they won't be seen by predators, which of course can take a female sitting on a nest quite easily. There's foxes and raccoons and even birds that will prey on ducks. So yes, camouflage, absolutely. And you see a female here on the nest with newly hatched ducklings. Next. All right, so here's just a few species of dabbling ducks. Northern shovelers, white-cheeked pintails, those are ducks that are in the Bahamas. That's a duck that I studied for my PhD. In the middle, you can see cinnamon teal. The males are that beautiful, gorgeous, rusty cinnamon color. Lower left are American widgeon, and then green-winged teal. And you'll notice in most of these ducks that, again, the male is brightly colored and the female is just different shades of brown and gray and tan. So that's a very, very interesting about ducks. They're sexually dimorphic. One other thing that's really interesting is that a lot of tropical and southern hemisphere species, the males and females look alike. So this is true of like the white-cheeked pintail in the upper slide. The male is in the back and the female is in the front. They look almost the same. If you look very closely, you can tell them apart. The male has a slightly brighter red bill spot, and he's slightly larger and slightly darker brown. But it's a really interesting question, like why did sexual dimorphism evolve in the northern species, but not the southern and tropical hemisphere species? So something to think about, but very, very interesting question. Next slide. Northern pintails eat. Well, they eat a variety of foods. They eat a lot of seeds and tubers and the vegetative parts of aquatic plants throughout the fall and winter. And they also eat aquatic invertebrates and earthworms. And so in the left side picture, they're dabbling, and here they're sifting through the mud. They're sucking in water and sifting out seeds and invertebrates through the lamellae, which are little fine little teeth on the edge of their bill. And so they're filtering out the water with the lamellae. And on the right side, it's called tipping up, bottoms up. And so here you see a bunch of males with their tails up in the air, and they're in slightly deeper water. So they're having to paddle with their feet to dip their bills down into the mud and sift through the benthos of the mud to find things to eat. So the diet of the duck changes quite a lot by season and by where they live. They do eat lots of vegetated matter and seeds throughout the year, but in the spring, females especially switch to a diet of eating a lot of insects and aquatic invertebrates. And they need to do this because they need to lay a clutch of eggs. So they need to eat a lot of protein, build up a lot of body fat so that they can lay eggs and then incubate for like 25 days. So they switch their diet to eating a lot of insects. And somebody's asking, how long can they stay tipping up? Oh, probably 30 seconds, 40 seconds. I'm not really sure how long they can hold their breath. Maybe a minute. But yeah, probably 20, 30, 40 seconds at a time. They'll come up, look around, take a breath, and then go back down again. So when they eat aquatic insects, they're eating the larvae of midges and damselflies and dragonflies and water boatmen and crustaceans. And if you do a wetland dip, you can find these critters and see what the ducks are eating. All right, next slide. Okay, northern pintail distribution. So this is the prairie pothole region. On the left, the orange shows the breeding area in North America. You can see that they breed in the northern Great Plains, up in Alaska and Canada and way far north. That area that I'm pointing to is called the prairie pothole region. And this is known as the duck factory of North America. And it's an area that's characterized by rolling hills and prairie grassland and millions of depressions in the ground called potholes. And they're small wetlands that are dotting the landscape. And so actually the grasslands, a lot of it's been converted to farmland. So it's like farmland with all these little wetlands scattered around. And it's a really important area for waterfowl, for shorebirds and grassland birds. And so it's called the duck factory because so many North American ducks are produced in this region. So they breed here, and then you can see their wintering range in blue. They use a lot of portions of the southern US. They winter in California, Florida, the Atlantic coast, Mexico, Central America, and northern South America. They do also get to the Caribbean, but they're not a super common migrant in the Caribbean. And they're one of the first ducks to migrate in the fall. Males start arriving on wintering grounds as early as August. And females leave a little bit later because they're still raising the ducklings. But the peak migration would be in September and October then for females. All right.
Lisa?
Yes.
Regarding the Caribbean, there was a question in the chat box about how often they come through Jamaica.
So I would say they're a pretty uncommon to rare bird in Jamaica. They're just not one of our most common ducks. They show up occasionally, but just in small numbers. The ducks that would be much more common in the Caribbean and Jamaica would be blue-winged teal and lesser scaup and greater scaup and ringneck ducks. And we get some shovelers and some widgeon and some gadwall. So pintails show up in just small numbers. It's not the biggest part of their wintering range. And yes, Jamie, I love ducks too. All right, so here on this next map, it's another map showing the distribution for the northern pintail. And this is from eBird. How many of you guys know about eBird? It's a fantastic resource. Look it up online. It allows you to keep a checklist of all the birds that you've seen. And so anytime you go outside, you can keep a checklist. There's a mobile app for it. And birders all over the world use eBird. And it's a great way to store your life lists and then also to see where to go birding. And so all these purple squares are where birders have been out and have seen northern pintails. So that's pretty amazing that people have birded all these areas, and it shows up really well as the birds range because we have lots of eBirders all over the world. Okay, next slide. And if you'll start that video going, if you click on the arrow at the bottom left, yep. All right, so what this is showing is eBird data.
Wait, I'm trying to.
Oh, there you go.
Wow.
Okay.
Very cool.
So this is cool. This is actually showing pintail movements throughout the year based on eBird data. This is citizen scientists like you and me that are going out birding and entering their data. And now we can actually see birds moving across the landscape. That's there during the summertime. They're up north. Now it's fall. They're migrating south. You can see them showing up in Mexico, Florida, Texas, and so forth. So that's really awesome. That's great citizen science data showing movements of birds. And Cornell Lab of Ornithology that runs eBird now has enough data from hundreds of birds now to show these migration animations. And if you go to the eBird website, you can see these for other species of birds. You can see their migrations. You can see where they're wintering and where they're breeding. Very cool, right?
Yeah.
Next slide. Okay, so courtship and pair formation. So this is another thing that's really different about ducks. It takes place on the wintering grounds. In other birds, what happens most typically is that birds are on the wintering grounds, but then in the spring, the males leave first and they head back up north to their breeding grounds. They set up a territory and they look to attract a mate once they're back on the breeding grounds. And the females return a little bit later. They fly around, they search the different territories, look at the male's resources on the territories, they look at the male, and they choose a mate. Well, in ducks, it's different. The courtship and pair formation take place on the wintering grounds. And what happens is they have like group courtship displays, and males will surround a female and compete for her attention with ritualized displays. And you can see in the image on the lower left, it's just a diagram showing like in the lower left, that's a drawing of a male doing a grunt whistle display, and there's a photograph in the upper right. And then in part B, that's called the head up, tail up. The male puts his head up and tail up really quickly, and the bird in the lower right is doing the head up, tail up. And then in the back, the male is doing a burp or a chin lift to another male. It's kind of like a threat to another male. So if you go to the next slide, I've got a little video showing males courting in action. So if you'll start that video, I'll explain what's happening. So here's a group of males. That's a grunt whistle. Can you turn up the volume a little bit on your end too, Christine? There's a female. Yep. That's the grunt whistle and the head up, tail up. Okay, you'll see them do like a body shake. There's the female, see the body shake, the tail shake. And it's like a chain of displays. They'll start the chain and sometimes they'll go through the whole chain. Sometimes they'll just do one or two parts of the chain. But they're all surrounding these females. They're whistling. Oh, it should keep going. Is there a bit more? Oh. Yeah, keep it going. And you can hear the males whistling. And they'll show off their, should keep going, Christine. Not sure why it keeps stopping. That's the head up, tail up. And they're giving little whistles while they do these displays. And see how they're turning the back of their head? They're showing off to the female in the back of their head. There she is. She's got like 4 or 5 males courting her. Does the head up, tail up, turns toward her. They do that burp display where their head goes up and down. They're giving a whistle. There's another grunt whistle. Head up, tail up, turn toward the female. Head up, tail up, hear the whistles.
So cute, I love it.
Very cool, right. And so when the female chooses a male, she'll start following the male that she's chosen and give it, and it's called the inciting displays, and she makes little clucking noises where she's following the male that she's chosen and she's rejecting the other birds. So very, very cool. So if you go out onto the wintering grounds, you know, in many parts of the US and their wintering ground in Mexico and South America, the Caribbean, you can see this courtship happening. And another thing that pintails do is they have aerial courtship called pursuit flights, where a group of males will follow the female and try to court her in the air. They'll be whistling and calling to her in the air, and males will be trying to compete in the air and maneuver close to the female. And they're quite acrobatic. These ducks can whirl and twirl in the air and make sudden rapid dives. And so again, it's a way for the males to compete and attract the attention of the female. So actually, as a postdoc researcher, I did a study on northern pintails and their courtship and pair formation. And I studied what it was that females were choosing when they choose a mate. And what I learned was that while I set up the ducks, I would have 3 males in separate compartments, and I would let the female swim in front of her and look at the different males and score and then see which male she chose based on the way they looked. And then I did a second experiment where the males were allowed to court with the female, and then I looked again to see what it was that she was choosing. And what I found was that the males with the really beautiful, long, gorgeous tertials with lots of iridescence, and then the males with the pure white breasts were the ones that were chosen. And then the males that also courted a lot and were really attentive to the female were chosen. So again, a male showing that he's courting and that he's really attentive would signal that you know, he's interested in the female and is going to give her a lot of mate protection during the pair formation and breeding process. All right, next slide.
Oh, so Lisa, so they meet up in the wintering grounds, and then do you fly together as a pair up north, prairie potholes?
Yes. So go to the next slide.
So what happens if something happens to one of them while they're in flight, while they're en route?
Well, if they lose a mate, they can try to pair up on the breeding grounds. That's what would happen. So what happens in these birds is that the sex ratio is skewed to more males than females. And that's true for a lot of ducks. And the reason, again, is because females are more vulnerable to predation since they're the ones that nest and raise the ducklings. So a lot of males will end up unpaired. So if a female loses her mate, she'll be able to easily find another mate. If a male loses his mate, he'll probably be unpaired because all the females will be paired up when they go back to the wintering grounds. So here on the lower left, you can see what the prairie pothole region looks like. The male follows his mate back to her natal area. That is the area where she was born. And again, it's thought that that's advantageous because, of course, she knows the landscape, she knows the wetlands. She'll often come back to the same wetland where she's nested before because she knows the resources that are there and she's familiar with it. So this kind of behavior is very different from other birds where the females, you know, they pair up on the breeding grounds and the males go back to their home territories first. Here, it's the female going back to her home range and the males following her. Okay, next slide. All right, so the nesting takes place in the spring. Females build a nest in a depression on the ground. They lay their eggs and they put a lot of down and around the nest to keep it warm. Clutch size is like typically 7 or 8 eggs. It can be as many as 12 in some areas. Next. You can see here a female with the downy ducklings. Next. The ducklings hatch after about 25 days of incubation. The females lay 1 egg per day and incubate for 25 days or so. And the ducklings leave the nest within about 24 hours. They're born pretty coastal, which means that they're covered with down. They can move and self-feed by themselves. The females will guard them and brood them, but they're perfectly capable of walking around and swimming around on their own within 24 hours of hatching. As you know, many other birds are born naked and blind and helpless and totally dependent on the parents to feed them. And that's a different kind of strategy. It's called altricial. And with ducks, the females invest a lot of nutrition in the eggs. So the eggs are big and the ducks are formed, born downy and ready to go. That's called precocial ducklings. Okay, next.
Lisa, we have a comment. Emma says, the courtship is wonderful. We all like attentive males.
Oh, I agree with you, Emma.
I'd love to have babies that were independent instantly.
Oh, I know. Humans have the longest parental care of any species.
Yeah.
Like 18 years of parental care, so it's quite different from the bird world, where it's just a few months, a couple months, or a few weeks even. All right, so what happens then is that early in incubation, males leave their mates. Okay, they guard her during egg laying. And what they're trying to do during egg laying is protect her from breeding with other males. And in ducks, called extra pair copulations, or forced extra pair copulations, are really common. And paired males will go out and try to mate with other females, and they do this by force. And so if you spent time watching ducks, you might have seen this happen, where ducks will be chasing other females and trying to mate with them. So males guard their mates because, of course, they don't want to be cuckolded. They want to be the father of all the eggs in the nest. But research has shown that many females have ducklings that are fathered by a number of different males, which is crazy. But that's true in a lot of the bird world, actually. It's not as monogamous as we thought. There's a lot of cheating going on. So what happens is that the males, once he's inseminated a female, protected her during egg laying, he ditches her, he's gone, and he goes off and undergoes a wing molt. And what many people don't realize is that ducks go entirely flightless for several weeks. They completely shed all their flight feathers, and then they grow a new set in summer. And so the males do that first. They will go into what's called a hiding plumage or eclipse plumage, and that is a male in the upper left. He goes into, very camouflage plumage that looks just like the female, and he drops all his wing feathers and grows new ones. And so when the female, when she's done raising the ducklings, then she also goes through the wing molt. So they again both have this flightless period. And that picture in the lower right was taken in October. You can see the male is just starting to get his breeding plumage again. So they're going to be molting back into their breeding plumage in the fall and winter. So often if you see ducks in the wintertime, even January, February, the males and females still look very much alike. They don't start to get their breeding plumage until different periods of time in the winter and spring. So you got to be aware of that and not just think it's a bunch of females. It could be males that are in this basic non-breeding plumage until they get their breeding plumage sometime during the winter. All right, next.
Lisa, we're running a little short on time.
I'm almost done. Okay, so fall migration, after both birds go through the wing molt, then they go through the fall migration. Again, they head to their wintering grounds, and then the whole cycle begins again. Next slide. Yeah, so the wing molt is true for all ducks. They all go through this flightless period. Okay, so quickly, just what are some threats to northern pintails? Well, there's a lot of loss of habitat from agriculture and development. There's climate change, which is causing long-term, trends in drying. Periodic droughts cause wetlands to dry up. That's kind of cyclical. There will be wet periods and dry periods, but it does cause numbers to go down when there isn't good habitat. The birds aren't successful in nesting. They don't survive as well. Pesticides and other contaminants are a problem in food sources. It's been found that ducks ingest plastic. We're finding that it is true in so many other species of birds. And then pintail ducks, like other ducks, are also hunted. And thankfully it is well managed, so it's done sustainably. Fish and Wildlife Service with pintails and other ducks, they do lots of surveys of ducks, and they make sure that we're not shooting more ducks than are available. And actually hunting has been quite good for waterfowl conservation because duck hunters support conservation of wetlands and restoration of habitats. So fortunately, because of the strong interest in wildlife and ducks in particular, there's lots of good habitat and conservation measures that are going on, such as restoring habitat.
Good news.
All right, so next slide. So that concludes my little presentation on pintails. I hope you found it exciting. I would suggest that you go birding, go look for ducks in your area, pintails, teal, other species that might be nearby you. spend some time watching them. They're beautiful and fascinating birds to watch. And so you can notice some of the behaviors that I pointed out today. Maybe see some courtship and feeding and competition between males. For the females, pair bond. They're really beautiful and interesting birds to watch. So I encourage you to get out there and look for some migratory ducks this time of year. And I think that's it. Take it away, Christine.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to turn off your mic here. Do you want to still stay on the screen there?
Oh, it does. I'll just monitor the chat then and try to answer questions. If you guys want to ask any questions, I'll answer in the chat.
Okay, and I'll unmute you then. Great. So let's see. Let's get going here. So now we want to share my screen. And so we'll do that here. So now we've got about 20, 30 more minutes. We're going to talk about sketching the pintail. And so what are some of the advantages of sketching? I know most of you guys here, if you're on, especially if you're signed up for this class today, you love to sketch or you love birds or both. And but if you're a bird watcher and you've never tried sketching, I really suggest it. It's going to really help you to see those field marks like Lisa was talking about. And so I don't want you to be worried about what the final product is in your sketchbook, no matter how bad it looks. If you think it's even just like a stick figure of a duck, doesn't matter. What matters is the time you spent looking at something with 100% focus. That's going to help you remember all those field marks. So I love to travel all over the world. I'm bird watching, and so here I am in Guatemala sketching. And so anyway, what are the parts of the duck to notice when sketching? We talked about this a lot already, so Lisa did a really good job for that. And so let's see. Let's see, where did I put that now? Yeah, she talked about that already. So anyway, in terms of the drawing them, I like people to think about this concept I call the six-step roadmap to sketching success. And so it kind of breaks it down really easily into just 6 things to think about while you're drawing. And so first I like to have you think about blocking in the basic shapes. And I usually start with the core body and then start adding on the circles and rectangles and triangles shapes. And I start thinking about proportions then. So when I'm adding the head, maybe the head is half the size of the body here. And maybe the tail is 1/3 of the length. Then I like to have you think about alignment. So what structures are aligned with other structures? So in this little European robin, its bill is aligned with its big proud chest, and its 2 legs are pretty much aligned. The toes are aligned. And then I like people to think about flow lines, or basically how that line is flowing over the animal or plant, just like how water would flow over a boulder. Is it smooth or is it jagged? Then I like you to think about angles, especially looking at those nice negative shapes that we see here. Are those 90-degree angles or 30-degree or 120? And then lastly, looking at negative shapes. So that's the part that isn't the bird, and that really shows up well when it's got a white background like this. But if it's in real life, hopefully you can notice that too. Okay, so then, so in this case, this is the bird, the image we're going to sketch. So in terms of talking about those 4 ideas, proportions, like we see how small the head is compared to the big, fluffy oval of the body. We see different angles here and different kind of negative shapes as well, like this very small angle here between the bill and the chest. And we see negative shapes like down here between the 2 legs. There's a nice big rectangle between them. And there's a kind of a 90-degree, maybe a little bit less than that, angle between the neck and the back. And so in terms of anatomy and field marks, we talked about most of those things already. Lisa did a great job at that. We just want to really notice, you know, like she said, the shape of the bill. The end of the bill has this little hook on it that's kind of very subtle. And don't forget that birds do have a nostril as well, although it's very hidden here in the black melanin of the bill. And they've got this big old fat puffy cheek. And they've got a relatively small eye, and that eye is sitting on top of that big fluffy cheek. And here we have another really good image where you can see that that nostril even better. And the upper and lower mandible, as Lisa said, is kind of flattened on the bottom, and that lower jaw, lower mandible is very skinny. And so mostly of what we see of the bill is the upper mandible, and it's got this tiny little smile right there. And there it is again from a different angle. And like Lisa talked about, we saw the speculum, and that shows a little bit in our bird that we're drawing today. And here it shows how different it is in different lighting conditions. So be careful of that when you're out birding and you're trying to look for field marks, because things can be dark or they can be much brighter depending on the lighting conditions. And like Lisa said, they have these big fluffy scapulars that are kind of hanging over the rest of the body depending on their position. And here's just the image of all the feathers, and you can see really obviously this big long tail feather. They have a pair of those big black long tail feathers. That's why they're called the pintail. And here, here's an example of where the bird is at rest with its his head kind of stuck down next to its chest and its back. And then here is where it's lifted up, like Lisa was showing during the courtship rituals. So you want to kind of notice that when you're sketching. And there's that long tail again. And then the feet, so as ducks, you know, they have these webbed feet. And we can mainly see these 3 toes that come out towards the front. So kind of like your normal songbird, they've got 3 toes in the front and 1 in the back, although it's very, very tiny in these guys, and we can't really see it very well, but it's right there. But unlike songbirds, they've got webbing between these little triangular webbings between the toes. And here's another image that shows that back toe, that 4th toe, just a little bit better here, that we're going to want to draw in our drawing. And then they do have small little nails that help them walk, and they're better walkers than other kinds of ducks. So Lisa alluded to that a little bit, that these guys are called dabbling ducks, and that means they just kind of tip themselves up and they dabble along getting their food. And they can walk pretty well with those feet right under them. But that's a little bit different than a whole other group of ducks that are called diving ducks that have a different anatomy, and their feet are way much farther back on their bodies and they can't walk as well. And so here's a really good image from this wonderful manual of ornithology, just showing you a little bit better, because we can't see that very well in our photograph. But again, we're going to notice that there's a small back toe, and then there's the 3 front facing toes with the 2 triangles of webbing and the very small nails. And then before we go on to the video of how to sketch them, I want to remind you that we're going to have, encourage you to post your sketches with the hashtag WMBD 2020 CareEat, which is for World Migratory Bird Day, okay? So anyway, and also before I cut out of this slideshow and start showing our video demonstration, is to remind you of our 3rd and last in our series, this Discover and Sketch the Barn Owl on October 29th. And we'll be reminding you about that again more on our Facebook page, on both Facebook pages. And also, if you are here on Crowdcast, if you're watching me on Crowdcast, you can go ahead and follow me on Crowdcast, and you can see and sign up for that over there. Okay, so let's start sketching. So I'm gonna get out of the slideshow and gonna start opening up the video here. And this is where you follow along. Oh wait, I gotta share it here. Here we go. Is everybody ready?
And thank you. We're going to have to drop out of that session. It's going to go for about another hour. But if you want to join Christine Elder and take that session on sketching, you can go to our birthdaylive.com website and click on the partner sessions for October 8th. And you'll see a link where you can go and register for that and see if you can get in there. But that was a great session, or you can sign up for the next event when they'll be doing the OWL, and you can join then. We are going to close our session before we start our next session, which will be featuring our Caribbean conservation panel and some other speakers prior to that. We'll have a discussion on how an organization or a city started a Lights Out program, and then we'll move into our conservation panel. So thank you so much. We'll see you in just a few minutes, and stay tuned for some more great presentations. Thank you.